Well, you got to love Gloria Gaynor. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good theme song. I was thinking they're gonna play. They said we're gonna play "I Will Survive," which really I don't recall that ever being my personal mode of operation. In fact, it's more like "I will thrive," and I will teach others to thrive. There was a theme song I once entered to that was entitled "Look Out for Number One," and it's not a very popular song. That it didn't get a lot of airtime. But the message is really powerful. And so when you look, like on the airplane, everybody uses the metaphor, put your oxygen mask on first. And that's something that we all really need to do. So, however, I have had many face-to-face conversations with people, and if I look around closely, maybe even some people in this room, that were told your probability of survival is very low. In fact, you're not going to survive. You've got 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And what I always tell those people is that's no man's call. How long you live is not up to man. And then someone asked me about my spiritual life, which is wonderful. And it is. My spiritual life is wonderful, and thank you for asking, because we're mostly spiritual beings. And therefore, we need to really pay attention to that part of our existence. But I'll give a quote to, I didn't even know who to give it to, but one of the ways that we succeed in life is pray as it's all up to God, but work as if it's entirely up to you. So when we look at this trillion-dollar mistake, it's probably way more than that. There's been $500 billion in the last 5 years just spent on cancer drugs. We have, at this point, about 350 approved cancer drugs. I'll show you the numbers. In 1971, it was actually 2 days before Christmas, and one of our most infamous presidents, Richard Nixon, declared a war on cancer. And at that time, he allocated $1.6 billion, which was really a big amount of money in 1971. Today, it's kind of pocket change, right? Most of us have that lying around. But 1.6 billion, figure that out. And they had spent at that time, in the last decade, 25.4 billion, which in today dollars is about 135 billion, to put a man on the moon. And they said something pretty fascinating. You know, if we can put a man on the moon, we can find a cure for cancer. Which is kind of a crazy statement, because if I were to ask the question, who in this room has cancer right now, besides me? If you are not aware, Dr. Jeff, stand up and raise your hand if you agree, because he's a real powerful cancer expert. Do you agree that everybody in this room has cancer cells? Does your research validate that they get cancer cells about every waking hour? And so I would always ask patients this question. What is the typical progression of cancer? What is the usual and customary progression of cancer? And people go, oh, it's bad. It kills you. It eats you up from the inside out. No. It is regularly and maybe thousands of times a week, if not every day, it is self-contained and destroyed. And cancer has been around since the beginning of time, and it's been around in all animal species, and all animal species kill it. So we can, if we can put a man on the moon, we can find a cure for cancer. I heard that we put a man on the moon before we thought to put wheels on a cooler. Now, I want you to think about that. That's pretty insane, isn't it? Hello, beautiful. I can't see your eyes from here, or it's a little dim, but hello, hello. I thank you for the love. I think I recognize your voice now, but I'll give you a hug in person because I like those. But if we spent more than $1 trillion and we've approved more than 300 drugs since we declared this war, how much progress have we made? Do you know, in terms of actual survival? Well, some people would say 0, but it's less than that. We have a higher percentage of the population today dying from cancer. Today. In 1971, it was 1 in 6. Today, it's 1 in 4.44. In 1971, 1 in 4 people would be diagnosed. Right now, it's 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women. How much progress have we made? So if we've always created cancer, and the normal progression of what we do is to actually self-contain and destroy cancer, what in the world have we done that we're not doing that better? So I have reached out to many mentors, which, by the way, I highly recommend everybody do. Get mentors in every area of your life: mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, social, financial, impactful mentors. Very few people have it all together. But why not seek that? Why not seek excellence in all those areas? So one of my mentors said this: cancer is a man-made issue, or at least the prevalence of it is. Many of you heard, how many of you heard me lecture on cancer before? So we have 520 people in the room, and maybe a third had heard that before. But I used to call it a normal response to a toxic environment. But it's probably more than toxins. And so 30 years ago, I stood in front of, or sat in front of, or bowed in front of, or learned at the feet of a great guy named Dean Black, PhD researcher. And he had a room smaller than this, but loaded with doctors, and he just simply asked, how does a hurricane start? And by the way, I had a climatologist in my office with a brain tumor about a year ago. And I asked him, how does a hurricane start? He gave me a PhD dissertation on a hurricane. And finally I said, well, would you like to know Dean Black's answer? He said, I would. He said, a hurricane starts when conditions are just right. This climatologist looked at me and said, I like his answer better. I then asked him, how does a tornado start? And he started giving me a PhD dissertation. I said, whoa, let's keep it simple. Let's keep it simple. How does a tornado start? And they went, when conditions are just right. How does cancer start? When conditions are just right. How does it go away? Change those conditions. And here's what Dean Black said way back when, and maybe there's a few more things that have evolved or emerged. But he said it was low oxygen, low nutrients, high acid, chronic inflammation, and immune suppression, usually secondary to chronic distress. So now let's get to this misguided war on cancer. Who's in the know of the cancer drugs or cancer therapies right now? Anybody in this room? A few people. So please name for me which of the 350 approved cancer drugs actually improve the circumstances of low oxygen, low nutrients, high acid, chronic inflammation, or immune suppression. Which of the approved cancer drugs address that? I'm sorry, how many? Louder for the mic so the whole world can hear. 1, 2, 3. None. Now, if you're in the know on this, how many of these drugs actually make those conditions worse? One or all the above. For the recording, which conventionally approved cancer drugs aggravate the conditions that promote cancer? 1, 2, 3. Is this a mystery? You know, I've been teaching up here, had a beautiful partnership with Nutridyne for now over 25 years. And we've worked up patients at seminars we taught, and I'll never forget, I worked up a lady where she actually developed a secondary cancer. which is not that terribly uncommon. I don't know how I got this. Do you think it could have been the chemo you were exposed to years ago? Oh no, that kills cancer. No, it actually aggravates the conditions that create cancer. So my research for this has been very extensive and a little different, and I'll share with you why. So I decided to start reading books like Radical Remission, where Kelly Turner, PhD, studied over 1,500 cases of people who beat cancer, which was like wellness against all odds on steroids. So Sherry Rogers wrote the book Wellness Against All Odds a few decades ago, and she looked at 30 cancer cases. And she said, what do they have in common? And there were 4 things. They all kept a positive mental attitude. The term psychoneuroimmunology is actually real. Every thought you think has an impact on your immune system. That's really what it means, but Sid Baker said it best. He says the role of the nervous system is to survey the external environment and elicit an appropriate response. The role of the immune system is to survey the internal environment and elicit an appropriate response. Embryologically, they are derived from the same stem precursors. And then he went on to say, the immune system is a circulating nervous system. They all did an all-organic diet, which was, I don't know, easier or harder 25, 30 years ago. Not sure, because maybe more people grew their own and we weren't relying on factory farming and genetically modified, where actually the pesticides are spliced within the food. And as one of my great patients said, I guess that means you can't wash it off. No, you can't. You're going to eat it. You're going to eat those pesticides. They all did pancreatic enzymes. And interestingly enough, we're going to discuss 3 major theories of cancer. There's not just one, there's 3. And the one that many trillions have been spent on is basically the mutagenic theory. It's actually a DNA problem. But this is a theme you're going to see again and again and again and again in this presentation because I wanted to hit home. So they took cancer cells. A cell that had cancer had a cancerous nucleus and a cancerous cell body. Then they took normal cells that had a normal nucleus, normal cell body, and especially normal mitochondria. And they decided to do a nucleus swap. So they took the cancer nucleus from the cancer cell and traded it into the body, took the normal nucleus out, and put that cancer nucleus in while that cell had a normal cell body and normal mitochondria. If genetics were the cause of cancer, those cells would become cancerous. But that didn't happen. Those cells did not progress to cancer. However, when they took the normal nucleus and put it in the cancer environment, the cancer cell body, the dysfunctional mitochondria, those cells got cancer. Now, that was published with rigorous controls in the peer-reviewed literature in 2015, and you'll all see the reference. And Thomas Siegfried, PhD, the guy that did it, he fully expected to turn the oncology world on its head, going, wow, we've been barking up the wrong tree. But it's almost like the study never happened. There was so much silence around it. How many of you were aware of that study? Raise your hand. Well, we have an in-the-know group. We have 500 people. We have about 5 that heard of the study. Wouldn't that be breaking news? We finally figured out we're doing something wrong. And we spent trillions on it. And many tens of millions of people have died as a result of our ignorance. That would be life-changing, health-changing, research-changing news, wouldn't it be? But not. So it's fascinating how time advances. You know, I look at how my mentors have progressed over time and what they study and what they look at. And my favorite thing to study now is connectivity. among people, among systems, among ecosystems. Because that's really what it all is, isn't it? I was training with my grandmaster in mixed martial arts, and he asked me a pretty interesting question, and he always does. He's a sage of wisdom and always wants to impart wisdom, not only how to hit people, but how to avoid getting hit, but better yet, avoid the circumstance that even creates any desire to hit anybody, which is true wisdom. But we're training, and he says, okay, grasshopper, I'm going to give you 3 words to define success. And you might think about it. It didn't take me long to come up with my 3 words. And I said, very confidently, health, happiness, prosperity. He looked at me and said, well, that's a good answer. But you know what answer I like better? I said, teach me. He said, relationships, relationships, and relationships. And so I processed that for a little bit, only to come to the conclusion I couldn't possibly, at this point in my time, come up with a better answer than that. What relationship do you have with the planet? What relationship do you have with yourself? What relationship do you have with your source? What relationship do each of the cells have with one another? It's a pretty powerful definition. So I can confidently say that we've really upped our cancer game and how we empower people to take charge of their lives with solid knowledge to win from behind. And you'll find out later there's a book called Out of the Box Cancer Therapies. And here's what it says. It says, if medicine has a really good solution for cancer, which it does for a few, go with medicine. If it doesn't, why would you do that? So I'll give the flip side. So I had a guy come in with pancreatic cancer, and he had a lot of means. So I reached out to my network over the world, right? It's all about connectivity. And I said, if you had pancreatic cancer in hundreds of millions, how would you manage it? Where would you go? And they said, well, we go to Munich, Germany. And they do intermittent fasting and insulin potentiation therapy and targeted therapies like high-dose vitamin C and other things that can, in a safe way, actually lead to the end of cancer cells. So I shared this with this guy, and by the way, he was from Germany. So it seemed like it'd be a pretty good move. He also had a lot to live for. Beautiful wife, beautiful baby. But he went to MD Anderson, the multi-billion-dollar tower. Maybe I shouldn't say where he went. In fact, let's just say for the record, I don't remember where he went. You know, I'm often wrong. I was going to say ask my wife, but that's a fact. I'm often wrong. And so he goes down to this big cancer hospital and talks to these PhDs and these white coats, and he says, you know, they've got a really new, exciting therapy for pancreatic cancer that they're very confident in. Well, I'm fully open to the idea that there's plenty out there that I don't know, but here's my advice to him. Awesome. I'm very happy about that. Please ask the oncologist to introduce you to the survivors. And I want to know their experience with this beautiful therapy. You see, because I've said this from the podium for decades at this point. I guarantee you I have a strategy to kill every cancer cell in your body so fast it would make your head spin. We take you and we throw you into a 5,000-degree blast furnace. And we're going to completely obliterate every cancer cell in your body. But you won't like the side effects. It's not complicated, is it? It only took 2 months for this therapy to beat him down to an absolute fraction of what he was with almost no survivability. It would have taken a miracle, which can happen. I'm open to miracles, right? Open to asking for them, open to expecting them. But he didn't live 2 more weeks. after they said, I'm sorry, the therapy didn't work. Now, this woman that I'm about to show you was a patient for a long, long time. And I helped her and her family through a lot of different things or gave them guidance that turned out to be really valuable. And so we'll have her tell her story. I think we will. It'll cue. Can we turn up the volume? Well, that's interesting. Can you cue it up from back there? Just click on it. Just click on play. Turn up the volume all the way. All you need to do is click on that arrow. There you go. Just click on it. There you go. That should work.
Hey, happy, beautiful day. Dr. Bob Rakowski here with Roy Sanders. It is now September 12th.
That's the second one, okay.
We first met in February of 2016. So what was going on in your world then?
Well, I'd been diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic melanoma.
Okay.
And I had a tumor in my chest, and of course the prognosis wasn't good. They didn't ever tell me if you had a certain amount of time or what it was, but I did a lot of research on it, and it didn't look good. It wasn't good. Any cancer diagnosis is not good, so.
Especially that one,
yeah. But I had a good friend that had been going to Dr. Bob for years, and he recommended that I come see him and get on a good nutritional program before we even start dealing with it, because that was really important in keeping my immune system built up where I could fight this on my own, whichever way I decided to go with it. And make a long story short, we ended up doing surgery to take the tumor out of my chest. Got rid of it and just got on a nutritional program, didn't do any chemotherapy or radiation, none of that. And I just kept improving, started losing weight, feeling better, just healthier than I've ever been. And you always worry about stuff like that coming back, but I guess that gives me motivation to keep eating right and staying healthy, and exercising. But it just gave me a whole new outlook on life and what I'm putting in my body and what I should be putting in my body.
So by their standards, you've been cancer-free for how long?
I've been over almost 3 years now, and the doctor I've gone to, when I was first diagnosed, my doctor told me, he said, that's not where melanoma starts. It starts on your skin as a mold. Typically, it can start under your fingernails, toenails, your anal canal, your GI tract, retinas in your eyes. So, of course, I went through all of those testing to see where it was, and they couldn't find it anywhere. The prayer, the Lord has been good to me. I feel like He's healed me. Along with good nutrition, we're going to keep it going, and it's just been I'm not going to say an amazing journey, but a very educational journey.
So let's just go back and clarify. So, we thought, okay, it's a really good idea to remove the biggest mass, which they did.
Right.
And then they were going to recommend a bunch of accessory procedures, right, to eradicate the body. But with nutrition, somehow, some way, your body took care of everything.
Correct. That's
How
right.
beautiful is that?
Yeah, and I notice now when I get cuts or stuff like that, I heal so quick. I mean, my body heals a lot faster than it used to. So that gives me a sense of well-being, that my body's taking care of itself now, and I'm doing what I should be doing, eating right and taking care of it. So.
And so for clarification of the audio, when you say you're losing weight, that can be a bad sign in cancer, but you lost the bad weight that you didn't need.
Correct.
And now
right.
you're the picture of health in every category. Do I have your permission to share this information with doctors, students, and patients everywhere?
Absolutely. Yes, you do.
Any conditions on that?
No conditions.
Thank you so much.
Uh-huh.
He's an amazing guy, isn't he? So melanoma is a little personal. There we go. I'm even chewing my words on that one. I lost my best friend to malignant melanoma about 8 years ago. And I watched him go from a 225-pound beast of a human that could tomahawk, slam, and always had my back, And that was a little rough. So I dug into that a little more and found some pretty nice strategies, which we'll share. And then the next case.
Hey, happy, beautiful day. Dr. Bob Rakowski here. September 13th, 2018 with superstar Anna Marie Omongo. And I'm going to step back, turn the camera around as soon as I figure out how to do that. Come on, turn it around. Or am I just going to go like this because I can't? All right. So we've been friends a long time.
Many years.
And we've been through some interesting things, but what have we experienced together most recently?
So most recently, I was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer in March of 2017. And so I came to Dr. Bob immediately, very fearful. So I went through cancer treatment, cancer surgery, more treatment following because it had been misdiagnosed. But in the meantime, just came to Dr. Bob for nutrition and encouragement and strength. And now they're told me I'm cancer-free. No cancer. I'm going back to work for the first time since I had my children. Very excited. And I'm feeling better than I have felt in many, many years. Like
So even before cancer?
long before cancer, yes.
Yeah, and if you don't mind standing up, let's just show, I mean, we've got older pictures of Anna Marie.
Don't show those.
Well, look how beautiful you are, right? So
Yeah,
you
I
actually
feel beautiful,
beat
yeah.
this major process. And I like what your family said. They said, remind us, why are we praying for you?
Yeah.
So what do they mean by that?
Well, I'm the one with all the energy in the family now. I'm the one that, they're all sitting around and I'm, on the move, and they're like, and I said, well, nutrition, right? It's how you take care of your body. So that's what I'm looking forward to going forward, because we don't want to see cancer again.
No, so we're gonna share some of this stuff in the fall, but we used nutrients that were actually known to enhance the killing effect of chemotherapy, to protect the body, to prevent chemo resistance. And how'd that go?
Well, I had cancer in several lymph nodes, several lymph nodes. They were shocked when they did the surgery and didn't find any cancer, zero evidence of cancer in the lymph nodes. So I think it went pretty well.
Yeah, it went really well today. All right, do I have your permission to share this
Absolutely.
information?
Yeah, absolutely.
Any conditions on that?
No.
All right, thank you so much. We're gonna make our world better.
Both were stage 4. Both had a poor prognosis. Both used the best of both worlds. Chemo can have a value for certain cancers in certain combinations. But if I were going to throw you in that blast furnace, shouldn't I at least protect you in some way? Shouldn't I do everything to protect the normal cells, to sensitize the cancer to the chemo while protecting the normal cells? And that is what lifestyle does. That's what intermittent fasting does. That's what ketogenic diet does. That's what the right nutrition supplements do. That's what Ganoderma actually prevents chemo resistance. The resolvins are known to enhance the effectiveness of chemotherapy. That's the activated omega-3s, as are omega-3s. And these are things that, if you look at the nutrition pyramid that I shared years ago, the base of the pyramid was food, and that was basically paleo keto. And then we move up that and we come to superfoods. And superfoods have all the fabulous 50, all the vitamins, minerals, amino acids, proteins, carbohydrates, fat, fiber, and water in really good quantities. And then other phytochemicals that have led to, in some cases, thousands of peer-reviewed medical studies. Then we're going to go with medical foods and functional foods. These are really clean, nutrient-based, complete food products with a balance of nutrients that are proven to work against a given health condition. And we may want to control the inflammatory process. We may want to seal and heal the gut. We may want to detoxify more effectively. We may want to regulate blood sugar. We may want to and need to do all the above. Then we're going to throw in a high-quality multi. Then we're going to do omega-3s. Then we're going to do probiotics. And there's a new term. How many of you have heard of the oncobiome? So we got 500 people, and again, we have 5 that have heard of the oncobiome. So we have more bugs in our gut than we have cells in our body, and every bug, like every living organism, eats, drinks, and goes to the bathroom. Good bugs eat poop and poop nutrients. Bad bugs eat nutrients and poop toxins. The oncobiome is amazing at just robbing the body of nutrients while intoxicating the body and suppressing the immune system. We probably don't want that biome. And then at the top of our pyramid, we've got the D3, K2 combo. So, 4 major topics. Is it nature or is it nurture? Or is it really a combination? Well, I've got to tell you, it's mostly the environment. And we'll share you a lot of data about that. We'll look at how this cancer pandemic has evolved, because I heard a quote the other day from a very powerful source. I think it was Galileo that lived to be 84. And Sir Isaac Newton lived to be 87. And Michelangelo was 89. And these men were born in the 1500s. And they weren't vaccinated, and they didn't have antibiotics. And how in the world did they live that long? And here's what they said. You go all the way back to the beginning of time, and modern medicine hasn't added a moment to life expectancy. But what they have done is they've reduced dramatically premature death. And the number one strategy is improved sanitation and hygiene. And we'll share that the body's top priority from blood flow perspective is to detoxify, to make the body cleaner. Certainly prevention trumps cure. It's easier to stay out of trouble than get out of trouble. And what if we are in trouble? Well, bodies respond to frequency, duration, intensity, quality, and timing of stimuli. And if you want to get better, you need to do a lot of right things and not very many wrong, and you should do these right things very, very often. Deepak Chopra said this about all the money spent in cancer, and he says, more people will live off of cancer than will die from it. Think about that. The movie The Big Short. This applies to a lot of scams, or a lot of things that maybe are misdirected and miscommunicated. I use that word. So in the movie, this was the quote. It says, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." So if you are fully convinced that cancer is a genetic defect and all of our drugs need to target the DNA or the processes or the repair or whatever, you might be barking up the wrong tree. And Stephen Covey talked about this in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You know, all of a sudden, there's a group that's using machetes and cutting through the jungle and cutting a path and cutting a path and cutting a path and cutting a path. And some guy climbs up in the top of the tree and he looks, he goes, "Hey guys, you're going the wrong way." And the foreman yells back, "Shut up, we're making progress." Think about that. So this is one of the guys in the movie, and he's looking at the housing bubble and all the loans that were just ridiculous. And it was so clear that this was just going to lead to disaster. And finally he looked, am I the only one looking at this? In the last 5 years, we spent $500 billion on cancer drugs. We've spent well over $1 trillion, and more people are dying today as a percentage. I'm not talking because the Earth's population went up. I'm talking as a percentage. Then we're dying when the war was declared in 1971. And by the way, these are indisputable facts. And here's one of the quotes from the movie. It says, "At the end of the day, average people are going to be the ones that are going to have to pay for all of this, because they always do." Now, we can part with money. We can make that all day, every day with the right guidance. But what about the preciousness of life? That's a little bit more of a commodity that we should protect, right? So I'm going to ask my beautiful friend in back to take a picture. Because Brian Johnson, over the last couple of years, has become my top mentor. And he basically has given himself a PhD in life and philosophy and optimizing humans. And I like his story as a metaphor because he was in law school, he realized he hated it, and he decided, I need to do what I want to do. Then ultimately, he's sitting there going, man, how can I get paid to read books? I like to read books. So he would read a book, and then he'd summarize it for his friends, and he called that a philosopher note. And when I came across him years ago, he had this 100 book summaries for $100. I went, well, how can I beat that? Right? And the subtitle of his work is More Wisdom, Less Time. And Brian has given me permission to use his stuff, which was, one, so well done. So he doesn't have a medical background, doesn't claim to, always says you need a medical professional, but he really summarized beautifully a number of books on cancer and the process and how we can win. And this all came about because his brother was diagnosed with metastatic pancreatic cancer. And suddenly he was thrust into the circumstance where he wanted to help his brother, which, by the way, his brother's doing great. And then he shared, and he does this for a living, but he decided, I'm going to donate all of that as a public service announcement. And he never makes a claim to be the world's expert, but he does claim to make the wisdom of the world's experts more digestible to everybody. And so he created Conquering Cancer 101, Conquering Cancer 102. And he creates these wonderful pictures, or probably his graphic artist does, but he thinks in pictures like I do and like a lot of us do. And here's what he quite simply said. Bring the cancer fighters in and move the things that promote it out. And the first thing he addresses is genes versus environment. And you're going to find out that if a twin, this is very solid twin studies, biologic parents died before the age of 50, but this twin was actually adopted out, it didn't matter at all in terms of their cancer incidence. Now, if their adoptive parents died of cancer with no shared biology, they were 516% more likely to die from cancer. Biology didn't make a difference. Environment increased the probability by over 500%. So let's say someone says the average person with your cancer will live this long. Well, there's an MD PhD that said, okay, I've never been average. I don't plan to be average here and now. And with a horrific aggressive brain tumor, when they told him he'd live 8 months, he lived 20 years. And then he said in the end, he was so passionate about sharing his message that he ran himself ragged with his travel schedule trying to share this with the world. And he's fully convinced that not taking care of himself led to his demise. An empowered mindset. So there's a researcher named Martin Seligman, and he talks about learned optimism versus learned pessimism. And if you learn that things are bad, you just crawl in a hole and die. And you don't help yourself at all. In fact, you hurt yourself. But if you are empowered to overcome, statistically, you will live much longer. Many years, actually, it was the 1990s, I was certified in biological terrain instruction. And I would take blood, saliva, and urine, and I would look at the pH, the electrical resistance, and the oxidation reduction potential. And I had many sick patients, and I had many elite patients, and I created my own norms and my own patterns, and I came to understand this, and I taught it all over the world. And here's how I think it happened. I was part of a program with a medical school in Texas. And so my primary license degree is as a chiropractor. Now I also have diplomates in nutrition and certified clinical nutritionist and kinesiology and other fun stuff, right? And I had this medical student in one day, and maybe my first patient was a hepatitis patient, and we put her on a protocol. By the way, she was doing really, really good. And maybe my next patient was a multiple sclerosis patient. We put her on a protocol, and she was doing really, really good. Then we had a cancer patient, and we put her on a protocol, and she was doing really, really good. And then we had a fibromyalgia patient. We put her on a protocol, and she was doing really, really good. And this girl pulls me aside, and she goes, "My God, this natural medicine is so expensive." And I just looked at her, I said, and by the way, Grant Cardone likes this question, it's expensive. Compared to what? Compared to what? Yeah, that Ferrari's expensive. Compared to what? Are you comparing Ferraris to Ferraris or Ferraris to bicycles? Interesting, right? So I said, compared to what? And she said, compared to medicine. And I did one of these. I said, how much is a single dose of chemotherapy? She said, insurance pays for that. I said, who pays for that? She said, insurance pays for that. I said, who pays for that? She said, insurance pays for that. I said, who pays for that? She said, insurance pays for that. And I looked at her and said, no, I'm paying for that. Me and my healthy friends that'll never use a nickel of that because insurance pays for that. Go back to The Big Short. In the end, the average guy is going to pay for it because they always do. So back then I was doing bioterrain. I was also doing the dark field microscope. And I loved both of these tests. And then one day I walk into a federal agent in my office. Happy, beautiful day. How can I help you? I'm here to investigate a complaint. What's the complaint? Never been a patient complaint against my license in 26 plus years of clinical practice. What's the complaint? I understand you're operating a highly complex lab. All right, you guys were here a few years ago. Here's my CLIA certificate. Here's the guy that was here. I looked at him, I said, have the rules changed? He says, the rules haven't changed. I said, okay, well, look around. So he looks around. And then he says to me, he says, I need some of your patient folders. I said, those are private. He says, they're not private to me. I said, you don't need a release? He goes, oh, I'll get one if you want. But you can either cooperate or not cooperate, and let me suggest you cooperate. Because if you don't cooperate, things are not going to be fun. Help yourself. Comes back a week later with 44 pages of violations and wanting to shut me down for 2 years for looking at blood under a microscope and measuring the pH of blood, saliva, and urine. Well, that really caught my attention. So I called my mentors and they said, we need to get you a high-level attorney in Washington and someone who's with CLIA and all this other stuff. And the attorney calls me back, and this was the exact question. Who did you piss off? I said, gee, I don't know. I didn't think I ever did anything to bother anybody. No. They want to get you. So $18,200 in legal fees later, I agreed to never do that again and basically be available for random inspections whenever, which they've been back 5 times, and pulling folders off the shelf each time. But then I had to redo what I did. I still look at the terrain, but I do it with all CLIA wave tests. So when it comes to nutrition, our friends are the right macronutrients. And the right macronutrients are basically plant-dense nutrients and low glycemic index. Now, Michael Pollan, in his book In Defense of Foods, put it as simply as it gets. He said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. But the promoters, Jack LaLanne said, he said, if God made it, it's okay. If man made it, don't touch it. So this man-made stuff seems to be a problem. So Brian Johnson actually introduced me to a guy named Tom Rath via his books, and he wrote a book called Eat, Move, Sleep. And he had this rare genetic abnormality that caused him to lose an eyeball at age 15 to cancer and has tumors all over his body. And Tom Rath's grandfather was, I believe, the guy that started the Gallup poll organization. So he comes from a very smart family. And he wasn't given much guidance on what he could do to make his life better, so he started digging and digging and digging and digging and digging. And if you want to live and your life's on the line, you might just dig and dig and dig and dig and dig. And he wrote a book about it, Eat, Move, Sleep. We already told you how to eat. He says you just need to do that consistently. How about move? Well, a certain amount is really, really good for your immune system. Less than that is really bad for your immune system. Way more is really bad for your immune system. And then sleep. Sleep may be one of the most powerful anti-cancer therapies known to man. Or let me suggest this. It's said that stress is the greatest oncogene we know. Sleep is a pretty good antidote for stress. And by the way, melatonin, which is part of what makes our sleep, and the gut makes it 400 times as much as the brain, directly impacts in a positive way every single hallmark of cancer. And we'll show you the slide on that. So the last time I had the joy of talking at this conference, I shared melatonin, 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 which I love melatonin. And my body loves melatonin. And your body loves melatonin. And even single-celled organisms love melatonin. And so do plants. It's a universal, beautiful molecule and is known to be a specific mitochondrial antioxidant. And in this whole theory, the metabolic theory of cancer, we're going to find out it's the mitochondria that appear to be the primary players. But Tom Rath gave you the big three, eat, move, sleep. But most of you know my magnificent seven. You've got to eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right every day. You may also know that there are 7 life areas. We're mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, social, financial, and impactful. And we need to work on all those factors. He likes the Serenity Prayer to help your body deal with stress. There's a new Serenity Prayer. Brian didn't know it, but I'll share it with him. So here's the old Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Here's the new one. God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one that I can, and the wisdom to know it's me. Powerful, right? We'll look at empowerment. So I'll give you the Malcolm Gladwell is another one of my favorite authors. And Gladwell wrote a book called David and Goliath, and the subtitle was something like The Advantage of Disadvantage. And he talked about when Germany kept bombing London and bombing them and bombing them and bombing them and bombing them in World War II. And they just wanted to deplete every ounce of hope in the people of London. But those that survived said, ha! The big bad wolf is coming after us with all they have, and they haven't fazed me. They can't touch me. Maybe there's something greater than me, greater than them on my side. I can't be beat. Think about that. What beautiful empowerment that could be. The environment, cancer is mostly man-made. Someone asked me about the Wi-Fi signals and all this EMFs. Well, there's plenty of data that it's not so good. But we also know that we don't have the same level of sensitivities. So those people that are really sensitive need to go the extra mile and maybe go live off the grid somewhere. There's plenty of places off the grid. Some people call that paradise, and some of them are. But we also need to protect ourselves even in places like this. Maybe less time. Maybe get out in nature. Maybe unplug your Wi-Fi at night. Some of you heard me teach a seminar on sports nutrition, and I interviewed Tim Hallmark, who at the time was training Evander Holyfield and did for 20 years. And I said, Tim, what advice would you give the new trainers? He says, Bob, it's always a team. It's got to be a team. It's got to be a team. No one knows everything. So you want to have really skilled, solid people running your program. Then the Chinese character for crises, or crisis, is danger plus opportunity. So one of my good friends, mentors, business partners, Dr. Sachin Patel, who has a mentoring group called The Perfect Practice. I said, well, I'd like to talk to you about cancer. I says, what is cancer? He said, well, it can be your greatest teacher. What an interesting statement that is. So I had a cancer patient probably 25 years ago, cancer survivor. And I said, tell me about that. He says, well, I didn't help him with this program at all. He beat it before he ever met me. He said, cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me. I said, really? He says, I was working 80 hours a week in a job that I hated. I was in a relationship that was in no way nurturing. And I didn't take any time for what I now know is most important in life. He said, but cancer changed all that. And I came to realize this time is finite. And I need to take care of me, and I need to take care of my body, and I need to take care of all of my relationships, including the one with myself, and the one from above, and the one from all the people around, and even with the critters below, because they're pretty important. Then he came up with Cancer 102. His first concept is bad math. Over $1 trillion of research and no increase in survivability. Genes versus metabolism. The data is clear. Metabolism is for sure, and environment is for sure, the greatest trigger. The cybrids, that's where they took the cancer nucleus and swapped it with the normal nucleus, right? The cancer cell that had the cancer nucleus, cancer cell body, swapped nucleus with a normal cell body, normal nucleus. The genetic material did not determine the progression of cancer. Warburg said it way back when, cancer is really hungry for glucose. It's been said cancer loves glucose. It's also been said cancer can't live without glucose. Now, there's some data that glutamine can affect some tumors, which is kind of interesting because it's anaerobic metabolism, but glutamine is the most abundant element in muscle and plasma, so I'm not a big fan of glutamine restriction. And by the way, there's 38 studies that show that it has powerful anti-cancer benefit last I checked. But glutamine goes to glutamate, which is fight or flight, and glutamate can go to alpha-ketoglutarate, which is in the Krebs cycle that can lead to some anaerobic energy production. And so some people say, don't do any glutamine. However, I would say keep the sugar and starches to a minimum, and minimum is 0. The metaphor of the good gardeners, imagine you had a beautiful garden and someone came by and saw some of the plants weren't doing well and basically just hacked off the dead leaves and spray painted to make them look pretty, but never addressed the soil or the circumstance. We've got to address the soil. The cancer's Achilles heel is that it needs sugar to survive. Cut off the supply lines and you can win. Cachexia is weight loss. It's breaking down from within. So what happens with cancer is the patient doesn't starve to death, but its resources are allocated towards feeding cells that only get the equivalent of 2 miles per hour, when most of our cells can get 36 miles per hour. That's the difference between aerobic or anaerobic. You put too much effort into that which gets 2 miles per hour, a lot of cancer, and you're going to burn out, and that's what happens. Radical remission, we're going to talk through the 1,500 cases, one by one, of the 9 things that they all had in common. And then Brian Johnson has a phenomenal vision that he wants to create cancer oases that give people organic, that teach them about lifestyle, that teach them about alternative therapies, that bring in people that can do IV vitamin C, and other things that are known to work pretty well. And then finally, every one of us is the CEO of our own life. And we need to act appropriately. So you may need to fire the current CEO and replace him with the upgraded version of you. And I had a conversation with a beautiful friend that she said she just did that recently. So this guy's an MD, PhD, was diagnosed with a massive aggressive brain cancer and was told he's going to live about 8 months. So René Dubau, he's the guy that actually isolated antibiotics. He says, I've always felt that the only trouble with scientific medicine is that it's not scientific enough. And here's what he meant. Modern medicine will become really scientific only when physicians and their patients have learned to manage the forces of the body and the mind that operate via the healing power of nature. We all have been inborn with the capacity to destroy cancer likely every hour of our life. It's only when we put the brakes on our own abilities through eating wrong, drinking wrong, thinking wrong, moving wrong, sleeping wrong, pooping wrong, that we put ourselves in a bad circumstance. So there was a picture of him after his brain surgery. And the doctor told him, don't bother looking up your case in the medical literature. And then when he looked up, he realized why. Because there was nothing in there that was going to give him even a glimmer of hope. But he was in a crisis, and that's a combination of danger and opportunity. And he said, all right, the average person is going to survive maybe, 8 months or 10 months. He says, I'm going to be the guy that's at the end of that curve. I'm going to be the guy that actually lives 20 years. And he did. So here's the Denmark twin study. And so we look, and basically the numbers within the table are the risk rate of the infant dying if on the left their biologic parent died at or before the age of 50, or their adoptive parent died at or before the age of 50. So notice, when the biologic parent died before 50, the child was 171% more likely, or 71% more likely than the average person to die prematurely. So there is some genetic component. The risk of infection was nearly 2x, the risk of death from infection. So maybe biology, on some level, brings in the resilience of our immune system. Or maybe it's just our ability to process stress efficiently. Cardiovascular disease went up 450% if the biologic parent died earlier, whereas cancer only 1.19. So they were much more likely to die from many other causes besides cancer. Now, if the adoptive parent died at 50, the risk was even, 1. The risk was even of infection. So environment certainly is going to be a factor in the immune system. Cardiovascular was 300% more likely. So we know that cardiovascular is a big genetic risk, which I'll show the comparison there. Cancer, 516 times more likely. So when I compare the two ratios, the risk of cardiovascular, environment trumps genetics by about 150%, 1.5x. But when we compare environment versus genetics for cancer, environment is 4.33 times more likely to kill you than genetics. So we'll see that the current consensus is that about 5 to 10% of cancers are basically genetic. But then we'll look at things like the BRCA gene. And does anybody know what major organelle within the cell, which proteins of which genome the BRCA genes affect? It's a leading question, is what the attorney would say. You're leading the witness. How many genomes do we have? We have a nuclear genome and we have a mitochondrial genome, which is about 16 times more vulnerable to oxidative damage and mutation than the nuclear genome. 10 to 20 if you look at all the studies. The BRCA genes affect the mitochondrial genome. There's over 200 studies that show when the genetic issue affects the mitochondrial genome, that is where the cancer risk goes up. So the language covers this very clearly. I'm going to show you many slides of this at multiple times in the presentation because I want to ram home the point. Here's what the author wrote in Frontiers of Cell division in biology. Here's what it is, cell development biology. Normal cells create normal cells. Cancer cells create cancer cells. If the transfer of a tumor cell nucleus into a normal cytoplasm begets transfer of a tumor cell nucleus into the normal cytoplasm creates normal cells despite the presence of tumor-associated genetic abnormalities. Transfer of a normal cell nucleus into a tumor cell cytoplasm creates dead cells or tumor cells, but not normal cells. Peer-reviewed medical literature says, put a cancerous nucleus in a normal environment and you will not create a cancer cell. So let's look at the causes. This reference says that maybe 5 to 10% of cancers are genetic. So what's number one? Diet. Is that within our control? Absolutely. How about smoking? Absolutely within our control. So, by the way, one of my great mentors told me many, many years ago, if you have a patient that smokes, the first thing you ought to say to him is, "Hi, my name's Bob, you need to quit smoking." And some of you heard this story, but I had a patient, brand new patient in the waiting area. We take a life history, we know what their habits are. I'd never met this guy before, and I just walked out, shook his hand, and I said, "Hi, my name's Bob, you need to quit smoking." And he laughed. I said, "I'm not kidding. World Health Organization says you're playing Russian roulette, and the chances aren't 1 in 6, they're 1 in 2. Smoking will kill 1 in 2. So let's fill 3 chambers of that 6-shooter and spin it and put it to your head." And that's what you're doing with smoking cigarettes. And he knew I was serious. So we come back and we run a bioimpedance analysis. And I saw a model out there, and it's a great test, simple test, easy test that gets us the most bang for the buck and super easy, right? Costs about $1 to do it, and the information can be life-changing. So I look at the guy, and I've already run many thousands of these, and I said, "It looks like you have a little bit of lean tissue loss. Are you losing weight?" He goes, "Maybe a few pounds." "Are you trying?" "Not really." "How's your strength?" "Oh, it's fine." "How much strength does it take to pick up the remote and click?" Click. Click. Not much, right? So we don't even adjust them that day. By the way, I don't have x-rays in my office, never have. Send them all out to an imaging center, have a radiologist shoot it and read it. There's plenty of those out there now. And that's a good thing. It saves you from radiation and liability and other things. But literally, the radiologist picks up the phone and calls me and says, "Bob, what's going on with this guy?" I said, "He looked like he had lean tissue loss, 40-pack year smoker." The guy goes, "He's got a massive tumor in the apex of his lungs." He was dead in 2 weeks. You need to quit smoking. So a couple questions you might want to ask yourself is, if what I'm being told makes sense? And if you understand that cancer is low oxygen, low nutrients, high acid, chronic inflammation, and immune suppression, secondary to chronic distress, does it make sense to maximize things that make all those worse and minimize the things that make those better, which too many people are being told? Or does it make sense to maximize the things that create an anti-cancer environment and minimize the promoters of cancer? What's the downside of doing things to get healthier? Takes effort, maybe takes money. But in terms of survivability, it's really, really good. So I really love the author Andy Andrews. I got on an Andy Andrew binge one time, and I read 8 of his books in a month because they were really good. But he's got a book called Little Things. And one of the things is a little thing like change. And he does a lot of keynote presentations, and all these people want to talk about change. And he talks about the myth of change. And you got to bottom out. You got to be at rock bottom. You got to be really desperate. You got to want to change. He says none of those things are accurate. And he says, I'll challenge you to come up with a single example where it explains there's just any more than 2 and only 2 things related to change. And the first thing related to change is, what's in it for me? If I change, what's in it for me? And the second thing is there reasonable proof that this is true? If I do this, is there reasonable proof? That's all it takes. So there was an article entitled The Deadly Quartet, and it was in a cardiology journal, and it said if you have a big belly, and if you have high blood pressure, and if you have insulin resistance, and if you have high lipids, oh, you're going to die. But the New England Journal of Medicine has been publishing the actual causes of death since 1990. Now, somehow they don't get stress on that list. But it's always been number one on mine, and I think it's been the number one killer in the history of the planet. But the big four, the deadly quartet, include stress, toxins, malnutrition, and physical inactivity. Why in the world would stress be higher now? The world is better than it's ever been. It is. There's a book called Abundance. It says our future is better than you think. There's also a book called Sapiens and Homo Deus, and Yuval Noah Harari is one of the greatest thinkers of all time, but he says in primitive tribes as much as 30% of deaths were violent deaths. 30%. Your neighbor always wanted what you had, and there's only one way you stopped them from getting it, and that was either run away and give it to them or fight. Fight or flight. That was it. Those were your only options. And he said in the entire world right now, in the entire world, the amount of deaths from violence is about 1 in 100,000. And most of them occur, 1 in 100,000 deaths, in third world countries. Sugar is far more lethal than violence. When he talked about the cavemen and all the things they had to deal with, the world has gotten so much easier. Prosperity, there's something like $60 trillion worth of prosperity on the planet right now. Enough for all of us, more than we'd ever need. Plenty of nutrition, plenty of clean water. I took a cruise, beautiful cruise, luxury cruise. I like cruises now, a lot. But they actually clean seawater 30,000 gallons an hour. And they have a rainforest in the middle of it. They call it Central Park. And they water it with fresh water. And every drop of water on the ship is fresh. They said you could actually drink from the toilet. I didn't try it. Maybe some of you will be braver. But we know that distress suppresses the immune system. It's just that simple. Glucocorticoids are immunosuppressive. So Kurt Richter, phenomenal experience, and they basically called it the psychology of hope. So what can a rat tell us about hope? So they actually put rats, and by the way, I'm really not in favor of any experiment that makes an animal uncomfortable, even if it's a rat. Right? I think we're actually all connected, even to the rats. But at any rate, so these rats were put in something they couldn't get out of, with vertical walls that they couldn't climb out of, and they just swim and swim and swim until they gave up and died. So how long do you think the average rat would swim until it gave up and died, knowing there was no way out? What would you guess? How long? It was actually 15 minutes. So both of you were right. You said 12 minutes and 3 minutes. I'm going to combine you both. The average rat would actually swim 15 minutes if they didn't have hope. But if, as just they were about to go down, they pulled them out, they gave them mouth to mouth, they gave them a nice hot chocolate and a little pep talk, guess how long they could swim? Someone guess. You said an hour, so that would be 4x. Any other guesses? Did someone say 2 days? That's a long time. From 15 minutes to 2 days, so we'll just average it. Or not, we'll go beyond that. 2 days is 48 hours. They would swim 2.5 days. 60 hours. Because they were fully confident that their efforts would be rewarded. Just don't give up. Just don't give up. Just don't give up. Just don't give up. So last year we had a big hurricane in Houston. And the timing sucked because I had just gotten back from Australia. Australia was a blast, but it's 16 hours time zone difference. And some of you know me, my number one personal self-care habit is sleep. And we'll find out that Einstein slept 10 hours a night, and that's my excuse. If you use more energy up here, you need to rest it, right? But at any rate, so I come back from Australia to this massive hurricane that dumped 53 inches of water on my neighborhood in 3 days. And so oddly enough, my clock was a little flipped and I was down the street by friends, and don't ask me why. I've got this really nice low-to-the-ground sports car that I like to drive, even if it's only a block. But I don't know why I took my wife's SUV. No rhyme or reason, I just did. And also my wife calls me, she goes, we hear the rain. I'm not thinking anything of it. She goes, you need to get home now. And the way it was said, no question, not why, I'll be right there. So I jump outside, and I'm looking in the street, and the street already has a foot of water in it. I mean, it was no time at all. It was like the most amazing flash flood you'd ever seen. Thank God I had the SUV because I had the ground clearance to get home, and it wasn't that far. Then I get home, and she's looking at the back door and has buckets because we have a really big pool. 70,000 gallons, so we have buckets laying around for pool stuff, which, by the way, it's a saltwater pool. We like health. And she says, the water's going to come in the back door, so our backyard drainage was not ideal. She says, I suggest we run buckets through the house. I just look at her like, are you nuts? How are we going to do this? So for 4 straight hours, she would fill 5-gallon buckets, and I'd run it through the house, and I'd dump it. And I'd run it through the house, and I'd dump it. And I'd run it through the house, and I'd dump it. And the water was within a 1/4 inch of coming in our back door. And after doing this for so much time and just not getting ahead, I just look, I go, I can't win! And then the rain just eased just enough for me to get a 1/4 inch ahead. Still sweating, still running, still carrying buckets. And then there's the next wave of hard. And I didn't think about it till the next day, but I went, come on! And it just eased enough. I'm not saying I command the rain, but I'm telling you that's how it happened. And well, the next night, that was 4 straight hours. We had a little reprieve, then it was 2 more hours. And then the next night we do it again for 4 or 5 hours, and the next night 3 hours. But amazingly, we own 6 properties in 4 different neighborhoods, and not one of our homes took a drop of water damage. And the only one we had to defend was the ones that we were there to defend. And I just happened to get back from Australia. Now, the bad timing was, not that I was home, but that I was pretty jet-lagged. and that wasn't a fun way to get over it. But rats in learned optimism, they actually grafted rats with tumors that would statistically kill about 50% of them. And then they literally taught a group learned optimism versus learned helplessness. Now, the circus elephant is a great example of learned helplessness because they take it as a little elephant and they chain it to a pole that they can't possibly move. And then they learn they just can't get away. So as an adult, they'll put a little string on their ankle and a little anchor in the ground that they could pull out without any issue, but they don't even try because they've learned not to try. But basically, they predicted that 50% of the rats would die. Reality is only 46 did. But when they treated learned helplessness, they'd give them electrical shocks where they couldn't get away. Electrical shocks where they couldn't get away. They'd just cower in the corner. They just realized that there's nothing I can do. Only 23% of those survived. But they gave rats an out from the shocks. They still shocked them. They gave them an out. And 63% of those survived. Even more than those that were not distressed by horrible shocks. So it wasn't the stressor that was the problem. It was the reaction to the stressor. If you let the distress defeat you, you're going to die early. This is what the study says. If you learn to overcome, you're empowered to beat whatever comes your way. And that's really powerful. So Henry Ford said this, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're exactly right. But we all need to find our beach. I watch very little TV, very little, maybe an hour a month. But there was a Corona commercial, and it said, find your beach, find your place of joy, find your place of happiness. But why don't we just create our own place of happiness, regardless of what's going on? Train happy. Figure out how to get your inner peace no matter what's going on. The Battle of Stalingrad was a horrific battle. Hitler was really mad at Stalin. He says, I'm going to make an example of you and I'm going to take your city. The people that were defending against the unbeatable German force were women and children that had never fired a weapon. Yet they won because the Russian general had a really great plan. He said, we can't beat them head to head, they're too strong. But what we can do is send some troops behind and cut off their supply lines. How well are you going to fight without food? How well is cancer going to fight if you stop feeding it? Sugar and starches, about the same. So the SAD diet, the standard American diet, which is just white and garbage, and some of you heard this before. I co-lectured with Barry Sears, the author of The Zone, in the year 2000 in Florida. And he put up the USDA food pyramid, and here was his statement. If ever there was a terrorist-like plot designed to destroy the health of the people, it was the standard American diet. And it works so well at destroying health. Whereas the ketogenic diet, leans, greens, nuts, and seeds, plant-dense nutrition, works really, really well. So this book is entitled Tripping Over the Truth. And pretty interesting quote. This is from Churchill. He said, men occasionally stumble over the truth, but most of them pick themselves up and hurry off as if nothing had happened. He was a pretty smart guy. Just imagine that you're getting paid a lot of money to investigate the genetic theory of cancer. And suddenly, there's a groundbreaking, revolutionary study that proves you've been barking up the wrong tree. Most of them just picked themselves up, brushed themselves off, and moved on as if nothing ever happened. So here's one of his quotes about the cancer industry. Soon it was apparent in interview after interview that the story went beyond the cold empirical data. It tapped into base psychology, human limitations, economic incentives, and the deep-rooted powerful force of groupthink, forces that carry the inertia of the Titanic. Here's what he's saying. The cancer machine pretty much knows it's headed for the iceberg. But there's so much in that direction, they just can't avoid disaster. At least not on the short term. But maybe we can learn from that mistake and move forward in a different way. So here's his statement. Despite embellished announcements from government actuaries, the real death rates from cancer are the same today as they were in the 1950s, and let me expand that, and significantly more than they were in 1971. So what would have increased it from 1950 to 1971 and still, right? And here's what it is. Mr. Nixon, you can cure cancer. And here was the data. I kind of blew it up. 1 in 6 will die from cancer. 1 in 4 will be diagnosed. So now let's look at the actual death tables from the CDC. Current number one killer, cardiovascular disease, 23.4% of the population. Cancer, 22.5% of the deaths. I always like this quote, everyone's entitled to his own opinion, but he's not entitled to his own facts. You can have the opinion that we're doing great in the war on cancer, but the facts absolutely dispute that. So there's the comparison. 1971, 1 in 6 will die, 1 in 4 will be diagnosed. 2018, 1 in 4.44 will die. 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women will be diagnosed. Total cost of the Apollo space program, $25.4 billion. They put a man on the moon in less than a decade. In today's dollars, that was $135 billion. There was $133 billion spent on cancer drugs in 2017 alone. Basically the same amount to put a man on the moon in a decade of overspending spent in 1 year on cancer drugs. $500 billion in the last 5 years. Big fan of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If we want small changes, we can change our behavior. If we want massive improvements, we change our paradigm. Now, one of my great mentors, Bob Proctor, has a seminar entitled The Paradigm Shift. And he says most of us develop our paradigm completely subconsciously. From all the influences around us, they teach us how to think like they think. So Yuval Noah Harari said this. He says, imagine that a billionaire said, I want to take an hour, well, let's make it 4 hours a day, every day to brainwash you. And by the way, you're going to pay me for that. How many of you would sign up? I didn't see any hands. One, you're going to sign up to be brainwashed by a billionaire because he wants to exploit you and steal your money. And he says, here's what Yuval said, but what are you doing when you're watching TV 4 hours a day? Just out of curiosity. So Jeff Bland, in his brilliant way of saying things that often needs interpretation in a dictionary, he said, we are constantly subliminally seduced to engage in anti-evolutionary activity. So let me break that down for you. There's a lot of messages all around us that are influencing our behavior without even knowing, and it leads to early death and demise rather than a thriving population. So we have to be a little bit conscious. So Otto Warburg says cancer, above all other diseases, has countless secondary causes. Each cancer is unique as your fingerprint or as a snowflake. But even for cancer, there's only one prime cause. Summarized in a few words, the prime cause of cancer is replacement of the respiration of oxygen in normal body cells by the fermentation of sugar. There's the trophoblastic theory. And this led to the rise of pancreatic enzymes. And by the way, the guy that wrote the book way back when, his name was William Kelly. And he actually beat pancreatic cancer. And his book was entitled One Answer to Cancer. And he said there's a massive amount of data that supports use of pancreatic enzymes. And so Beard, who was an embryologist around the turn of the century, made the observation that a developing baby was kind of like a tumor. And that the placenta actually starts invading mom's host tissue, sending out networks of blood vessels to essentially parasitize mother. Baby is prioritized over mom. And that's a brilliant design. But at some point, the placenta stops invading the host tissue. And he just happened to find that that coincided with the exact time that the fetal pancreas started secreting pancreatic enzymes. Every animal species had the same phenomena. So Beard recommended pancreatic enzymes for pancreatic cancer. William Kelly beat pancreatic cancer with pancreatic enzymes and other things. Sherry Rogers' book, Wellness Against All Odds, 30 cancer patients who all beat cancer with nothing but natural remedies, all used pancreatic enzymes. Here's a little tip on that. Take enzymes with food, they digest food. Take enzymes away from food, they digest infection. They digest scar tissue, they digest cancer. What's the window? 30 minutes before, 2 hours after. The mutagenic theory of cancer. I didn't see TJ here, but is TJ here? TJ Harrington, one of my favorite humans on planet Earth, a guy that absolutely wants to change the world, but a year ago he said, Bob, you got to read this book, you got to read this book. So I said, okay, I'll buy this book. Don't read this book. It's called The Emperor of All Maladies, and it's the story of cancer. And cancer is this shape-shifting, stealth organism that if you don't do everything it takes to kill it, it will kill you. Now, the guy who wrote it, I think he's sincere. I also know he's very smart. But what if you spent your life getting smart at the wrong things? I hope you haven't done that. In this conference, I'm thinking that's pretty true, right? But here's what it says. His focus was on cancer immunology, and many of his patients needed some greater context for cancer and a reason to go through the awful treatments. Here's what he said. This cancer is so bad, if we don't do chemo, it will kill you. This cancer is so bad, if we don't do radiation, we will kill you. This cancer is so bad that if we don't control everything you put in your body, which, by the way, we certainly don't want to put a nutrient in your body that was ever not studied directly against cancer. You wouldn't want to do that, would you? So they feed at major cancer hospitals Doritos and Coca-Cola still today when people are going through chemotherapy. Because you couldn't do dynamic fruits and greens because there isn't a study. Well, no, there's actually 100,000 years of human study that says that exactly what is in there is the enemy of cancer. Now, if it were all about mutations, and it were all about mutations, and it were all about mutations, biggest animals who have more cells would have more mutations and therefore more cancer risk. Animals that had a longer lifespan would have an increased cancer risk. But this is not what happens. This does not happen. This flies in the face of cancer's theories, and it's called Pato's paradox. More cells, more cancer. Nope. Cells around longer, more opportunity to be mutated. More cancer. Nope. What's related to cancer? Reproductive lifespan. So there's a great book, A Means to an End, The Biologic Basis of Aging and Death. And here's what it said. Every species has one ultimate biologic purpose, and that's to pass on their DNA. Once that's done, there's a lot of things that change. A lot of things that change. So it's the reproductive lifespan that's the big player. So there's proto-oncogenes and there's tumor suppressors. But again, we'll show the theory again and again and again, multiple times throughout this presentation. When you take a damaged mitochondria and put it into a normal cell, that cell has a high probability of becoming cancerous. If you take a damaged nucleus and give it normal mitochondria, it does not become malignant. And those are the people that put their heart and soul on the idea of promoting this idea of a metabolic approach to cancer. And it's that approach, taking control of the internal environment, that has led to 1,500 radical remissions and counting. And those are just the ones that have been studied. So powerful. You can easily tell the difference, even morphologically, even what it looks like of a damaged mitochondria versus a normal mitochondria. They don't look at all like one another. So, Thomas Seyfried he's the one that wrote the book, Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. I don't read you many slides, but this one I will. Here's what Seyfried said. He said, "First it became clear to me that the therapeutic action of some anti-cancer drugs operated largely through reduced calorie intake. So the nausea of chemotherapy, where you don't feel like eating, might actually be a bonus. If you're taking in less calories, there's less to feed the cancer. Second, that reduced caloric intake could target the majority of cancer hallmarks. So we're going to be fans of intermittent fasting. How much should you intermittently fast? Well, go think way back when. Most people didn't eat all day long. In fact, they spent all day trying to find something to eat. So maybe a 5-hour window. Maybe less than that. Third, ketone bodies can serve as an alternative fuel to glucose in most cells with normal respiratory function. Cancer cells cannot burn ketones. When cancer metastasizes, it appears that it's actually cells from the macrophage lineage, those are cells that will normally travel throughout the body, that ultimately have damaged mitochondria and damaged respiration. Cancer cells, regardless of tissue origin, express a general defect in mitochondrial energy metabolism. And finally, cancer can be effectively managed and prevented once it becomes recognized as a metabolic disease. So, the quote again, if all cancer arises from mitochondrial dysfunction, then replacement of damaged mitochondria with normal mitochondria should prevent cancer. And that's exactly what they saw and exactly what they published, and something that exactly didn't get any press at all. Amazingly. So, I was mentioning the miles per gallon, so look on the left is the normal cell. Can actually make 36 molecules of ATP from glucose, whereas the cancer cell is going to make 2 molecules. It's the mitochondria that are there. So here's a powerful statement. There are over 200 studies in the medical literature ranging from 1934 to 2016 that all highlight that damaged mitochondria and altered energy metabolism is present in nearly every type of cancer. So notice what it says. Mitochondria play a central and multifunctional role in malignant tumor progression, and therefore targeting mitochondria, which is basically detoxifying the body, making the body ketogenic, alkalizing the body, delivering oxygen, controlling the free radicals, are the things that will actually nourish the mitochondria. The most famous tumor suppressor gene is entitled or named P53. And notice what it says. P53 plays numerous distinct roles in mitochondria-related processes such as apoptosis, autophagy, mitophagy, and mitochondrial quality control and regulation of cellular oxidation reduction. So how many have heard the word autophagy? Probably most of us, right? It means the cell will actually recycle itself and eat itself. How about mitophagy? So we have 1 of 520 people that have heard of mitophagy. The cell will actually destroy its own mitochondria if it's healthy. Your cell is supposed to look at itself and go, how am I doing? How's my DNA? But understand it's the mitochondria that ultimately says, we can't repair this DNA injury. We're going to kill the cell. That's apoptosis. It's like molecular hara-kiri. It reduces nucleases that cut the nucleus into little pieces and says that cell will never reproduce. But there's another beautiful check, and I didn't go back to the history and find out. I just came across this term in preparing for this presentation. Cells will go, how's my mitochondria? Oh, not good. I'm going to kill the mitochondria. When that fails, when the cell doesn't have the nutrition and the stress management and the environment that it needs, that's the cell that can become cancerous. BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes, which were so famous, actually implicate or affect mitochondrial proteins, mitochondrial DNA. Even leukemia is associated with mitochondrial dysfunction. More words directly from the medical literature. Mitochondria gained a central role in the regulation of cell proliferation, which is a hallmark of cancer, and the modulation of metabolism and apoptosis, whether the cell kills itself or not. Accordingly, defective mitochondrial organelles contribute to cell transformation to cancer, diabetes, and or neurodegeneration. They are now implicating these dysfunctional mitochondria in autistic kids. So it seems the same strategy we use for cancer, ketogenic, which generally by definition is gluten-free, high-quality plants, is really good for the mitochondria, high-quality nutrition. I'm amazed when I look at these complicated pathways that PhDs must have spent, I don't know how many man-hours preparing, and the data is so clear. Dysfunctional mitochondria lead to dysfunctional control of cell metabolism, cell repair, cell apoptosis, cell respect of its neighbors. The mitochondria do it all. Harry Carey's a really good analogy. So here's one of the things I want you to notice. The picture there shown shows a bunch of cells. It shows normal cells. It shows cancer cells. A high sugar diet actually increases cancer's appetite for sugar and its ability to suck sugar out of the body. You actually, by putting sugar in your body, not only feed cancer, but literally create a stronger cancer addiction for cancer and its ability to pull it out of you at the expense of every normal cell. The receptors actually up-regulate. And here's basically what it says. A high sugar diet ultimately leads to malignant progression. By the way, normal cells actually will downregulate their insulin receptors in a high sugar diet. That's what causes the insulin resistance. So the sugar is around damaging your body. So this one is a real powerful book that really does a nice job putting together really all of the metabolic pieces. And so Dr. Nasha Winters, shown on the left, had stage 4 ovarian cancer at age 19 and was given no hope. But she's a pretty smart person. And she said, I'll figure this out. And she did. And now 25 years later, looking beautiful and helping tens of thousands, she continues to thrive and share how she won. And Jess Kelly is the nutritionist that helped her write the book. So here are the 10 things that they look for in the metabolic approach to cancer. Number 1, they suggest we need to pay attention to genetics because they do make a difference in our overall being. But we know that epigenetics certainly trump genetics. And a big part of epigenetics is nutrigenomics. So we'll show you the slides on epigenetics, but it's really a much bigger factor in how well we are. So I was given a lecture in Mexico this last weekend, and we were talking about epigenetics. And I said, now imagine the person standing before you if I had spent my almost 54 years smoking, drinking, eating junk, and sitting on the couch. What would be standing before you? And I said, let me give you a frame for that. My great-grandfather died at 37 of a heart attack. My grandfather died at 49 of a heart attack. My dad had quadruple bypass at 49, and when he turned 50, he was the oldest living male in the family tree. So who would be talking to you if I smoked, drank, and ate crap for my 54 years? Someone else. And I don't mean a completely different physiognomy that Nutridyne wouldn't dare put on stage, but I'd be 6 foot under. Number 2, balance the blood sugar. Minimize it. Here's a simple rule. Humans do not need carbohydrate. There are glucogenic amino acids, there are ketogenic amino acids. The word protein comes from the Greek word which actually means of primary importance. Therefore, we can make sugar, anything that our cells would want, from protein through the process of what's known as gluconeogenesis. Toxin burden management. I'd rather call that detoxification. But here's a quote from way back when: all toxins inhibit mitochondrial function. The more toxic you are, the more dysfunctional mitochondria. Remember, those are the players in cancer. Repopulate and balance the microbiome. There's more bugs in our gut than cells in our body. We really want to take good care of them. And by the way, it's also known now that these bugs actually educate the immune system. And you can make severe allergies just plain go away by creating a better microbiome. Maximize your immune system. The primary enemies of the immune system are stress and sugar. Modulate the inflammatory process and oxidative stress, enhance blood circulation, while at the same time inhibiting angiogenesis to new tumor cells. Create hormone balance. Recalibrate the stress levels, including your own biorhythms. Everything has a rhythm: day, night, winter, spring, summer, fall. We're not on all the time. We need downtime. And we do well with consistent rhythms. And then finally, enhance mental and emotional well-being, which is really critical. So if I'm right on my time, it says I have about 12 minutes before the first break. Is that right? If you can give me that's exactly right. So here's what I found has worked really well in the past. Whatever idea was revolutionary and will enhance your ability to serve your patient populations, I literally want you to take 1 minute and teach it to your neighbor. And then I want your neighbor to teach you whatever it was that they found revolutionary. So that's only a couple of minutes. Then I'm going to call on a couple people, and I want to know what this group thought was most important. And well, slide-wise, we're not even halfway through, probably about a third. There's lots of stuff to talk about, but I gave you a real long intro. But here's what I want you to know. If you got just what we said now, or maybe in the intro, you got it. You got it. We're just going to add more credibility, more references, more examples. But take a moment, teach your neighbor, have your neighbor teach you. We'll do a group review, and then we'll get a break for a few minutes.
President of that new detox too.
Hey, you're looking pretty sharp there, buddy.
Wow.
Feeling good?
I love it.
As are you.
Yeah,
Love it.
that's a new dynamic.
Thank you.
And right as we break, I'm gonna do another lap. So
Okay.
I'm just gonna bring it up now and I can just put it up there.
Cool. So I should just draw it before we go on the break?
What's that?
You just bring up the box and I'll just draw it?
Yeah,
Any
yeah,
particular announcement you want to say or anything like that?
Well, I'm just gonna probably tell them a little about the special sheet we have. That's one.
Cool. All right. Great to see you. "46 seconds. All right, about 30 seconds left. And then we've actually got a microphone floating where if you have a pearl that you want to share or you found exciting, we'll give you the mic. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, who has a pearl? If someone said they love me, I love you too. All of you, even if I don't know who said it. All right, big love to all. My beautiful friend Erica.
If the 3 keys to success are relationships, 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 it occurs to me that number 10 should be number 1, so all the others can fall into place.
There you go. I really like that, right? So understand that I really believe that that's pure wisdom. Life, success in life is this: relationships, relationships, and relationships. So focus on those in a beautiful way. Michael has his hand up.
Optimism can create the shift for awareness for healing.
There you go. Real powerful, right? Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. And Michael's a great example of that, right? When he woke up a quadriplegic 16 years ago, they told him he'll never walk again, but he's literally walked at one point more than a mile with the assistance of a walker. That's not bad for a quadriplegic, right? Really powerful. Which, by the way, what I always like to do is take care of our own. And so maybe we'll get Nutridyne involved with something where we can find a way to add value to all of you and also add value to Michael's life, right? So in the past I've taught mini seminars, adjusting seminars for a donation or whatever. So if we can find that way, that's one of my favorite humans ever, and such an inspiration. Another pearl. We've got a hand, so they're going to keep you running. In a room of 500, it's often hard to find, oh, look at that, what a beautiful baby.
It's my second grandson.
Wow, congratulations.
From Lucy.
Lucy's amazing.
Yeah. That cancer doesn't feed off of ketones.
There you go. Ketones cannot feed cancer, therefore cancer will starve to death, and a ketogenic diet is where we want to go.
Bob, like you, I always have a lot to say, but I'm going to keep it simple. Rats have taught us that hope floats.
There it is. Hope. Hope is beautiful, right? Well, I think you just summarized the mental, emotional component of it so wonderfully. Others. Yes? Mitochondrial dysfunction, yeah, that's a hallmark. There's over 200 studies since 1934 that all show that, and then that hybrid, literally swapping the sick nucleus or cancer nucleus with a healthy nucleus, that cancer nucleus in a healthy cell body does not create a cancer cell. So can we make cell bodies healthy? Sure. Can we turn that on? So we'll give you a quote later from an integrated oncologist. He says, naturopathic medicine, or let's just call it natural medicine, is not as good at conventional medicine at killing cancer cells. But we're way better at creating the environment where cancer cells just plain die on their own. Right? That's pretty cool. Anybody else? I'm hoping there's a couple of pearls. We got Ned up front.
I'd like clarification. You said intermittent fasting, then you said a 5-hour.
Yeah, it really depends on your genomics and what you're dealing with.
Well, I think what I heard was it's a 5-hour window of eating.
Yeah,
then
I probably said that. Yeah, that would be correct, Ned. So every once in a while, I'll say something that doesn't make sense, and feel free to go, whoa, time out, Bob. When I was talking about intermittent fasting in a 5-hour window, it was a 5-hour eating window, not fasting window. And sometimes people will say, well, how long should I fast? And literally, they've looked at the ApoE genotyping, which is relatively easy to test. And so from either our mom or our dad, we got an ApoE2, an ApoE3, or an ApoE4. And they call the ApoE44 the death gene, and the ApoE22 is the longevity gene. But keep in mind, you could be a 2-3, a 2-2, sorry, 2-2, 2-3, 2-4, a 3-2, 3-3, 3-4, 4-2, 4-3, 4-4. The 4-4 is the death gene. The 2-2 is the longevity. Even for the longevity people, the data is clear that intermittent fasting at 12 hours is very beneficial, even with the best genes, and with the worst, down to about 6 hours of the eating window. So you get a 12-hour eating window if you've got the longevity genes, but a 6-hour eating window if you've got the set of genes that make you more vulnerable. Anything else from this hour? Yes, Andrew.
Pancreatic enzymes are activated at the point of gestation when the trophoblast stops invading them.
There you go. The justification for pancreatic enzymes in cancer therapy is the idea that the trophoblast, which actually invades the maternal uterus, is a model of cancer, and in every animal species that have been tested, it stops invading when the fetal pancreas starts creating pancreatic enzymes. So let's take that a step further. It would look like pancreatic insufficiency would lead to a rise in cancer. And it certainly seems that that's happening, doesn't it? And how do we get pancreatic insufficiency? We stress, we eat wrong, we don't exercise, we don't help sugar into our cell without the aid of insulin. Yes? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I've seen some evidence that they said that we actually stop producing pancreatic enzymes at the age of 26. So we should maybe have a huge decline.
Well, I would question that, but I haven't seen that study. So the pancreas does a lot of things. There's a digestive component, there's an endocrine portion, and endocrine is the beta cells, and we've got insulin, and we've got glucagon, and other wonderful things like that, but we make proteases, lipases, and amylases. And I wouldn't doubt that our efficiency drops over time, and it drops with worse habits, but it doesn't resonate with me that would completely disappear. It seems like we'd need it. But then again, the body has redundancy and digestive enzymes within the brush border, and then there's amylase in the mouth. So I'm open to the idea that it's a possibility, but I wouldn't think it'd be ideal or planned. Or planned. Other. We got probably one more, then we're going to have a drawing. I think Greg is going to bring up. I see it already.
Fix your gut, because a healthy gut makes a healthy immune system.
So if I heard you right, one of the keys is the absolute healthy immune system?
Fix your gut.
Fix your gut. Okay, so 80% of the immune system is clustered around the gut. It's the microbes in the gut that actually help to train our immune system. It seems if we've had bad microbes, we can do some bad training, and then we do know that probiotics enhance those things. We know that gut dysfunction is related to autoimmunity. I'll show you a reference later that science suggests that maybe as much as 90% of all health problems may have origin in the gut. That's pretty significant. I'm not sure that that includes the negative impact of stress on the gut and digestion and motility and chronic inflammatory process and stuff like that. But let's just say that that's a really good tip. If you start with the gut and fix the gut, I don't think it's ever a bad starting point. I'm not sure it's always the best starting point, but if you can't go wrong, when in doubt, go with the gut, right? That's a good rule. So Nutridyne always does an amazing job. If you can figure out how good an organization is doing, just look at the fruit on its tree. And I've been so blessed to have a relationship with them for a long, long time, but we got 520 really good people here, right? And so it's clear that they're adding value to every one of you every day. And I predict that as they've been doing that and expanding that capacity, that's exactly what they'll continue to do. So now you have Okay. So we are about to dive into some of the details. So certainly Jeff Bland has been a nutritional mentor, a lifestyle mentor, anything we could ever imagine for a long period of time, for probably everybody in the room, the founder of functional medicine. And I just got a nice invitation to speak on the radio for nutrition and cancer, and I'm just going to respond to that. Someone asked me, how can we increase our outreach and let the world know the message? Well, that's easier now than I believe ever before. And so if you read the book Tools for Titans, there's a movie director who's worth millions. His first name's Casey. I don't remember his last name, but he literally said, okay, I'm going to put content out on YouTube every day for 500 straight days. And he didn't just do a little selfie video. He actually made a really powerful video production. And over time, when you do quality work, you're going to get noticed. And so the advice I gave to the person that really wants to increase their outreach is, it's so easy to sprinkle content out there now. And if you just keep serving people, there will always be people to serve, and that list will grow. And so, I really don't think anything's free. If you're giving something away, you're planting seeds of prosperity that will come back. And the more generously you do that, the more generous the universe is with you. So when we talk about this concept of emergence and epigenetics and nutrigenomics, these were the big three paradigm changers that Jeff Bland had identified. So we talked about, how does a hurricane start? Well, it starts when conditions are just right. How does a tornado start or emerge? When conditions are just right. How does illness emerge? When conditions are just right. How does illness resolve? When the conditions for health are just right. So the perfect storm of cancer: low oxygen, low nutrients, high acid, chronic inflammation, and immune suppression. And those are the things that we want to go over. So there's a peer-reviewed medical reference. I showed it later, but I'm going to quote the source here is Dr. Nasha Winters and Jess Higgins-Kelly in the Metabolic Approach to Cancer. They said, indeed, it is well established that genetics is the cause of only 5 to 10% of cancers, and most of these cancer genes encode proteins that impact the mitochondria. So you look at these vulnerability genes, and they're impacting not the nuclear genome, but the mitochondrial genome. And again, from Oncogene, these are the exact words, the peer-reviewed journal. Mitochondria gained a central role in the regulation of cell proliferation, which is problematic in cancer cells, and apoptosis, which doesn't happen as it should in cancer cells, and the modulation of metabolism, which, by the way, would be, in a good case, normal or healthy cell respiration. And clearly, they say, defective mitochondria contribute to cancer, diabetes, and neurodegenerative conditions. Very powerful. So, we showed the picture before, and I'll do it again, just for impact. Cancer cells have altered mitochondria. They are very inefficient with cell energy. That can either bankrupt the body's health by stealing all the energy, or we can use it, as one author so cleverly stated, as a cancer's Achilles heel, realizing they can only live on sugar. Why don't we kill or get rid of the sugar so that the cells cannot survive? BRCA1, BRCA2, again, are associated with mitochondrial protein abnormalities. P53, the most famous tumor suppressor gene, really creates mitochondrial problems. If we don't have good mitochondria, the cells do not regulate the replication ideally, and therefore they don't die when they should. I like this quote from Thomas Seyfried. He says this: "The failure to discuss the role of energy metabolism in the origin of cancer would be like failing to discuss the role of the sun in the origin of the solar system." Just a slight break from the science for a moment. There's a poet named Rumi who's very famous. I think he was around 1200. And he says, in all this time, The sun has never once told the earth, you owe me. Imagine a love like that. And just share your light with the world in that way. We shared the comparison of the risk of cardiovascular, which is stronger in terms of genetics, 1.5x, but then cancer, which is clearly an environmental issue. The twin studies show that very, very well. So on some of the times that I've been on stage, I've played videos, not just patients. Those always get a lot of fun and a lot of ideas, I hope, and motivation. And so I started putting those on Facebook. And in fact, one beautiful lady came up to me and she said, hey, you showed a video of someone who was going to have their foot cut off because it was gangrenous from diabetes. The woman never had the surgery. She only lost the tip of the toes. And if you become, a Facebook friend, you can just look, and I even have a public figure page. You can see the difference in that foot that saved itself. But she said, I'm not sure who it was related to, or maybe her mother, maybe her aunt, but basically dramatic, similar response. One limb that was supposed to be cut off completely wasn't, and then another one not at all. So she had half of one foot that was not savable, and the entire total foot when she was going to lose both. So very powerful. But Dean Ornish, he did a study on genetic expression, and in specific, genetic expression of genes related to prostate cancer. And he gave people a fairly simple program: diet, exercise, and stress management. And literally, when they looked at the gene mapping just 90 days later, they realized that they turned down the dimmer switch. We can turn our gene expression up or down. They turned down the dimmer switch significantly to the point where it could be easily detected in over 500 genes related to prostate cancer. But what I remember so powerfully about an interview with Dr. Ornish after that was he was asked, if these changes are so powerful, and we know they are, and they appear to be so simple, why aren't more people doing them? And Dr. Ornish had a brilliant response. He said, we associate pain with change. We associate pain with diet. We associate pain with exercise. He said, sustainable changes must be pleasurable. So we want people to learn to enjoy. And by the way, Andy Andrews has really good questions. He said people ask the question, well, why am I so fat? That's not very empowering. But if they ask the question, how can I enjoy sculpting the body of my dreams through diet and exercise? That's a much better question. Paul Clayton, who published this in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, and also the later study in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine. But here's what he said powerfully. He said, analysis of the mid-Victorian period in the United Kingdom reveals that life expectancy at age 5 was as good or better than exists today. And the incidence of degenerative disease was 1/10 of what we currently have. And he believed it's because the people then consumed levels of micro and phytonutrients at 10 times the level than they currently consume. Now, I might go with the Magnificent Seven. They weren't exposed to genetically modified foods. They weren't injected with neurotoxins moment after birth. They didn't have the EMFs. They didn't have a lot of other stuff. So our world is very, very different. But this is really powerful. In Victorian England, they did autopsies on everybody and published the results. And they estimated that 2% of 80-year-olds died of cancer. That's 2%. 2 out of 100. Cancer is now the number 2 cause of death in children. Number 1 is accidents. Something has clearly gone wrong here. By the way, cancer and cardiovascular, 8% of all deaths, currently 68%. So more than an 800% increase in those 2 things. So Epigenetic Research, basically it says, we can tell that epigenetics is like flicking a switch, either on or off, but we'll also say that not only are the genes on and off, but they can either be turned up or turned down. And so ideally, we want to have our health-promoting genes turned up and on, and our unhealthy genes turned way down or off. I'm a big fan of Bruce Lipton. Biology of Belief is a must-read, still as accurate as ever. I showed a video of Bruce Lipton years ago, and he said, I believe it was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, he was actually doing stem cell research. And they would take stem cells and they'd put it in a petri dish. And I believe this was the 1960s. And what he said was, if we changed the growth medium, we could take a stem cell and we could grow pancreatic tissue. We could grow muscle. We could grow nervous tissue just by changing the growth medium. And he said, I had to step back because I was taught that genes were primary. But all those stem cells had the exact same genetic material, but by changing the environment, they completely changed which genes were expressed. And he says, I just got hit. It's like, holy cow. The genes are not the major player. It's the environment. So nutrigenomics, simple concept. Good food, and what is good food? If God made it, it's okay. If man made it, don't touch it. Had a conversation with the doc during the break. We should eat like our ancestors ate. So I happen to be from Central Europe, so I should eat like Central Europeans. If you were from the rainforest, you should eat like them. If you were an Aborigine, you should eat like them. If you were an Inuit Eskimo, you should eat like them. Whatever your background, that's who you should eat like, because it's a fact that our genes have changed very, very minimally over the last 70,000 years. But our environments have changed very dramatically. So poor food choices, we'll just call that the standard American diet, are going to give us a really bad genetic expression. So Newsweek, cover story, Diet and Genes, the New Science of Nutrition and Aging. Just now think of food as genetic switches, because it really is. Let's think of thoughts as genetic switches. Let's think of exercise as genetic switches. Let's go with all the Magnificent Seven. Eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right. What's right for you? Well, it's what makes your body feel good, honors your history, and moves you in the direction that you want to go. So certainly sugar, right? Pretty powerful statement here. Do you like sugar? So does cancer. So does inflammation. So does diabetes. So does arthritis. So does yeast. So does insomnia. Isn't that interesting? All those things are there. So when we look at all this sugar, this is a powerful statement. Glycation reaction, sugar plus protein forming a crusty protein, certainly results in free radicals, which are related to diabetes and cancer and aging, but it also damages the DNA. And notice what it says. It says the modified or glycated DNA was highly immunogenic. So what does that mean? You could actually trigger autoimmunity with too much sugar damaging the cells. This is a pretty powerful graphic. You can take the time and look through it. I really doubt that it's all inclusive, but it's pretty nice. Showing the 10 negative cancer-related effects of too much sugar in your diet. Too much. So someone asked me the question, well, clearly we have ways of digesting sugar. Clearly we have ways of burning sugar. Doesn't that mean we need sugar? Well, under certain conditions we might. And so some of you, and Greg just actually mentioned to me briefly about maybe we should roll out some more courses in sports nutrition. So one of our great friends and mentors, Charles Poliquin, passed tragically. He left behind an incredible legacy and a great life and a lot of impact. But he really knew sports nutrition in and out. And when I would teach sports nutrition for his group, I would tell people that we have 4 energy systems. I have 3 seconds of burst ATP if I need it. I have 3 seconds of creatine phosphate if I need it. Maybe up to 2 minutes of anaerobic glycolysis. And by the way, probably the limiting factor in anaerobic glycolysis is how much lactic acid I create, which, by the way, will slow down all the processes. So there's an article, it's kind of nice, it's entitled, Why Can't I Sprint Forever? Because you'll change your chemistry that'll make you collapse so that you stop creating all this acid and you don't ultimately kill yourself with it. But then we have aerobic glycolysis. But, you know, the reality is slow energy is slow to make. Long-lasting energy is slow to make. So we have sugar if we have a really intense circumstance that we need to get through. And it can be good, but we don't want too much. Truth About Cancer, an amazing documentary. Sugar is the main fuel source for cancer, and therefore a ketogenic diet is highly recommended. So how does a PET scan work? Well, basically they put radioactive sugar in your body and they put you under a scanner. So decades ago, the data was that cancer eats about 10 times as much sugar as normal cells. Some references say now 50 times as much. And the average reference says about 30 times as much, right in between. But let's just put it this way. Sugar feeds cancer. So I did a consult with a family one time, and they brought in this little boy with a brain tumor, and he had failed under conventional care, and he was critically ill. In fact, we basically had to, send him to the hospital because I was literally afraid that he wouldn't wake up the next day. Most dehydrated young man I'd ever seen, but I took time and I talked to the family, and I was telling them, okay, here's what we're going to do in terms of diet, here's what we're going to do in nutrition, but I also said, look, this kid's got a big brain tumor. Stanislaw Brzezinski in Houston, Texas, go talk to him. And he has actually treated a lot of my patients and a personal friend's life with a non-operable mega tumor that the medical authorities gave her no hope for, is alive and cancer-free 5+ years later, and just thriving and enjoying life. But anyways, so they took him to the hospital because he needed IVs. And they called me frantic. They said, they want to put sugar water in his veins. You just told us sugar feeds cancer. And they would not deviate from their protocol. They take a dehydrated kid that could die without fluids and go, you got a choice, sugar water or nothing. Now, think about that for a minute. That is a horrible position to put in someone with knowledge, right? Why are you feeding my cancer? Why are you shutting down my immune system? The two enemies of the immune system are stress and sugar. I'm going to assume being in the hospital, thinking you're in danger is stressful, and then let's just put sugar on your veins and just make it worse. Not a good idea. So, this is basically the cancer diet. Keto for cancer. Easy enough. Leans, greens, nuts, and seeds. Depends on your case, depends on your sugar management. Some will say no fruit. I'm a fan of low glycemic fruit. Really colorful berries can be good. I don't necessarily like that picture shows strawberries because they usually are some of the most intoxicated foods on the planet. But it doesn't mean you can't get a really good organic source. Really good quality fats are really serving. And by the way, one of the major factors in cancer is really poor quality fats. So we'll talk about the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, but some suggest that the hunter-gatherers actually developed in a time where the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio was about 1:1. That's what some of the references say. And now it's about 20:1. And they didn't have this ton of hydrogenated horrible fats, and they certainly didn't live on vegetable oils, but that's all happening now. And remember, we said that sugar not only feeds cancer, but it actually increases cancer's appetite and availability to extract glucose from the bloodstream. As a high sugar diet will normally downregulate insulin receptors or sugar receptors on a normal cell, it actually upregulates them on the cancer cell. And that's a problem. I shared this data. This was the journal Carcinogenesis, 1999. They realized way back then that energy restriction, calorie restriction, can actually kill malignant and premalignant cells. So if you are the least efficient at energy, and you don't have enough energy to serve every cell in your body, which cells are going to die first? The ones that have the least efficiency in terms of being able to make energy. And that would just happen to be premalignant and malignant cells. Peer-reviewed medical reference here. Cancer is a complex disease, here it does say genetic, I took word for word from the article, as a consequence of environmental exposures, which are the driving force. So even though they say it's a genetic issue, it's triggered by the environment. So, why don't we clean our air? It's not that hard to do. They have really good air filters that have multiple ways of cleaning. And so we look, and if anybody's building a new house, you literally can have a central duct system with the same type of operating room or air quality as operating rooms, where you have like a black light filter and a particle filter, and you have a way of killing microbes. And these have been around for a while. My wife and I built our home about 13 years ago. We don't have any carpet. We don't have any paints that outgas. We have every breath of air that comes into the house filtered through a central system, so we breathe as clean as possible. Got tons of plants. In fact, we have a rainforest jungle that we've created because we know that that's nature's air purifiers. And fascinating enough, NASA, the National Aeronautics Space Institute, has approved plants to clean the air. And they have a list of their top 10. There's this concept called forest bathing. And is there anybody here that noticeably feels better when they're out in nature as opposed to inside? Maybe I should ask the flip side of that. Is there anybody that doesn't have that feeling? When they're out in clean, pristine, beautiful nature, who doesn't feel better? So notice that's 520 people. It's unanimous. We feel better out in nature. Well, now they know that literally plants release something called phytoncides that actually will kill off infection in your system while simultaneously enhancing your immune activity. And they literally found the increased immune response lasts about 30 days. So that's very hopeful, isn't it? So if we can get a good long weekend in nature once a month, strongly suggested that we're going to move our bodies in a better direction. Lots of ways of purifying water. Same kind of idea. You know, I remember my son was about 6 months old. Now he's 25. But I had a guy knock on our door, and he was selling water filtration systems. And the company he represented was called General Ionics, and they put the water filtration system on the space shuttle. So they were pretty good. And literally, this guy comes into my house. He goes, well, let me show you your water. And I went, oh, you got to be kidding me. Then he showed me his purifier. I'm like, wow, that's awesome. I'll take it. And then he thought he needed to talk me into justifying the cost of the system. And he kept going on. I said, I'll take it. He goes, you haven't heard the cost. I go, I'll take it. This is important to us. You know, so in the 1990s, whatever it was, $5,000 for a whole house unit. And I had a little foresight because my wife and I were just getting started. And I said, I want the biggest unit you have. Is it transportable from home to home? He goes, yeah. So we went from whatever, 1,500 square feet to 2,500 square feet to 4,500 square feet. Probably more than we need. But every drop of water is clean. Every breath of air is clean. Everything we have in the home is as clean as possible. And it's very, very doable and not that much more expensive, right? You put the money up front and it's a really good investment. So we like organic, local, natural, grass-fed, cage-free, free-range. So the book Abundance, The World is Better Than We Even Know and Better Than It's Ever Been and Getting Better Yet, you know, brings up these interesting questions. And one was of clean water. But now we can clean seawater and make it drinkable, relatively easy, or water plants, relatively easy. One thing that just doesn't resonate with me in terms of food is they can actually genetically grow a hamburger in a petri dish. And they did it in 2011. And I think the cost was something like $30 million to grow this first burger. Well, now they have it down to $11 per burger. But here's what they said. Do you realize that a pound of beef actually, they estimate, takes about 4,000 gallons of water? 4,000 gallons of water to create the grass, to feed the cow and everything else. So my brain is starting to think about that for a minute. You know, could we possibly genetically create, even though we're using genes that, if we can use the word God made, can we actually use that outside of the environment to maybe grow something that could nourish the species? I'm playing with that a little bit, right? Plenty of people are having in vitro fertilization. They're fertilizing the ovum outside the body. So it doesn't seem that far of a reach. I'm still wrapping my head around it, but I like the idea of saving the planet and feeding the people. Those are two things that absolutely resonate with me. When you look at green products, there are so many more green products. I've got a reference that says, I believe it's 79% increase in green products just since 2011. So these voices that were speaking, sometimes they fell on deaf ears. Why are you worried about those pesticides? Why are you worried about that GMO? Why are you worried about those cleaners? And then they go, wow, didn't I have great foresight? The person that was hearing, I knew I should have gone to, right? Kind of amazing that people have those ideas. The microbiome, maybe up to 90% of all disease. There's certainly way more of them than us. Just one of those funky numbers. There's more bugs in every gut in this room than there are stars in the known universe. Think about that. That's a lot of bugs. And we can't imagine that they wouldn't have a part of our picture of health. And so this article was entitled, "The Microbiome and Cancer. Is the Oncobiome Mirage Real?" And the evidence is promoting the idea that this is really real. People with messed up microbiomes certainly are going to be more prone to colon cancer, but maybe all other types of cancer. So when we start looking at the immune system, the top enemies of the immune system are stress and sugar. Here's the peer-reviewed medical study. As blood sugar goes up, immune function goes down. Blood sugar feeds infection, blood sugar feeds cancer, blood sugar slows your protection against those two things. Elevating your blood sugar is a formula for becoming sick. And so we've seen the outcome in terms of infection and challenges with diabetic patients. Chronic distress leads to premature aging of the immune system. But now let's go back to that study on hope and on learned optimism. If you don't want a stress-free existence, you'll die earlier than if you learn to overcome stress. So we like the idea of just saying, bring it on. There's this mindset that we're not going to be delivered anything that in some way we can't handle. That doesn't mean handling it, doesn't mean you have to do it by yourself. You just realize that success is relationships, 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 and then you reach out to good mentors and good friends and good family members when there appears to be something overwhelming, and then you can overcome it. So the natural killer cells, the cells that kill cancer cells, the cells that kill viral infected cells, these are the cells that are most vulnerable to the immunosuppressive effects of stress. In many ways, physical fitness is related to immune fitness. So this is a pretty interesting study. Again, it's rats. But they gave rats a really bad flu. And they took 3 groups. They said, you know what? We're going to have you lay on the couch. Just relax, watch TV. We're going to have you do moderate exercise. And we're going to have you run a marathon or just something really intense. Well, there's a sweet spot for exercise, and it's not doing nothing, and it's not pushing yourself beyond what normal people could do. So 57% of the rats that were sedentary died of this flu. Only 18% died of those that had moderate exercise, whereas 70% that went over the top with exercise died. So what's over the top? That depends on your level of fitness. If you're in pretty good shape, you obviously have a lot more that you can tolerate without suppressing your immune system. We want to modulate inflammation and oxidation, and these two go together. So I remember teaching basic nutrition in the early 1990s, and I pulled out the definition of oxidation from, at the time, Webster's Dictionary. Remember that one? Right? It was actually a book. But it defined It talked about combustion. Let's use the word combustion. So it said definition number 1, combustion is an act or instance of burning. Definition number 2, slow oxidation as in the animal body. So if we're actually burning energy, that's actually accurate. And I remember saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. And one guy, I still remember this today, he goes, in my house, where there's smoke, there's dinner. So I still laugh about that today. That's, very, very, very clever. I got another one too I'll share in a moment, because it's fun sometimes being on stage where someone just really, really has a good joke. But at any rate, so I was talking about calorie restriction. And at that time, it was the only proven method of longevity. And so if you're burning less, creating less smoke, intoxicating the body less, this was proven to increase longevity in every animal species tested, and that's still today. But when Jeff Bland and I were talking about obesity on an international series, he was talking about one of these fat blockers, and it was called Orlistat. And we named it Oilystat. And basically, the top side effect was mild fecal incontinence. And so I mentioned that to the crowd, and the guy in the front row, I said, will someone please explain to me what mild fecal incontinence is? And the guy in the front row said, that's when it happens to someone else. Inflammation is fuel to cancer. So one of the times on this stage, I quoted The Lancet, which said this, it was British Journal of Cancer, it said these exact words, the chronic inflammatory environment is essential for neoplastic progression. You must have it there for cancer to go out. Inflammation and oxidation are certainly coupled. Oxidation is like the process of rusting, and we're protected by antioxidants. So on one of the break conversations, we were talking about oxygen and its benefit after concussion. I was lecturing in South America. It was the 1990s. It was actually Sao Paulo, Brazil. It was a massive conference, and it was translated into about, I think, 8 different languages. And there was me and another American guy. Most of the other people were from around the world. And I still remember his name. His name was Neibauer. And he was quite old. I'm going to say in his 80s. And he was presenting information on hyperbaric oxygen and stroke and traumatic brain injury. And he was showing these studies where people got such amazing function back. And it was incredible, and it was really well-controlled studies. And finally, I looked at him and I said, what are you doing here? Why aren't you in America? He says, I can't get an audience. You mean to tell me people aren't interested in stroke recovery? He goes, you can't patent oxygen. There's no money in it. They're not interested in it. But I have students that work at hyperbaric centers that have actually seen people in vegetative states, like kids that were underwater for 30 minutes, given no hope, come back to pretty good function with oxygen, hyperbaric oxygen. He used a lot of cerebral palsy studies back then. So maybe there's a few more of that going on now, but the point I wanted to make about oxygen was there's too much for anything. Just depends on what we're giving. Everything's a toxin. It's just a matter of dose. So by the way I explain this to my patients, I'd say, by the way, do you want me to teach you how toxic water is? Does anybody here want me to teach them firsthand? I see a head nod. So we've got a swimming pool here at the hotel. You and I will go over there. You dive to the bottom, drink water for 12 minutes, and I guarantee you'll get the lesson, right? You'll know how toxic water is. But it's the same thing with air. You can get too much. So we balance that with antioxidants, some of which we make, glutathione we make, and if we subject ourselves to controlled oxidative stress, we get better at making glutathione, one of the benefits of exercise. But there's many intrinsic and extrinsic antioxidants. We actually want to balance those. When we start talking about omega-3s, hunter-gatherer, maybe 1-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Standard American diet, maybe 20-to-1 or more omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. So I want to try to say this in a way which doesn't throw stones, but it probably will, but I won't mention names. So I was lecturing at a hospital in Houston, Texas, and I showed up to teach a hepatitis support group because I had some patients with hepatitis that were doing really well. So there was a triple antioxidant therapy that was published in the 1990s. It was milk thistle, it was selenium, and it was N-acetylcysteine, and that combination was actually pretty good for hepatitis patients. So I had some patients that were doing pretty well. But I showed up to teach this, and there was a mix-up in rooms at the hospital. And so there was a diabetic support group and a hepatitis C support group. So there was a nurse practitioner teaching the diabetic support group. Now, how far back this was she had transparent sheets that she put on an overhead projector and she'd write on them. Or maybe there'd be something written ahead. But anyways, so we meet in the back of the room. I said, well, there's a room mix-up. She says, how much time do you need? I said, well, I'd like 30 minutes for information, 30 minutes for question and answer. She goes, oh, I only need 5 minutes. Well, I said, cool. You go first. So her presentation was easy. This is drug A, here's the pros and cons. This is drug B, these are the pros and cons. Drug C, D, and E, here are the pros and cons. Hopefully, 5 years from now, we'll have new and better drugs and we won't have to worry about that. Does anybody have any questions? And the guy at the far left in the front row where Lauren Stoner is sitting right now said, yeah, I have one question for you. I've had diabetes for 30 years. What exactly does insulin do in a healthy body? She couldn't answer the question. Just clueless. So I had an associate doc that was there, and she's looking at me like, Bob, help out, help out. And I'm just sitting there. So she gets up, and she's very bubbly, and she says, well, it's like your cells have a door on them, and insulin opens the door and lets sugar and nutrition in. So they ask her another question. She answers it. Another question, she answers it. Then she gets a question she doesn't have the answer to, and she said, well, maybe Bob could answer that. He teaches this topic all over the world. So I answered that, and I answered the next one, I answered the next one. And then I looked out at the room, and I said, well, you're all type 1 diabetics, right? No. They were all type 2 diabetics. And I just looked at them, I said, well, you don't have to be diabetic if you don't want to. And they just looked at me like I was from outer space. And I said, look, my average diabetic is non-diabetic in 60 days. Well, 6 of them of that group came in, and they were all non-diabetic in 60 days. Well, guess how many times I've been invited back to that hospital to speak? Exactly 0. Exactly 0. But back to the fats. So you can look at the omega ratio in the cell. So one of my colleagues was running that test, and he had a nurse practitioner, whatever her specialty was, and she just had horrible aches and pains that just were no longer resolving. He says, let's run your omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. It was 80 to 1. The worst he'd ever seen. So here's the simple lesson there. No one has all the answers, but you need to pick what's right for you. And if something is not working in your body, try something else. I think it was Einstein, maybe it was Confucius, maybe it was both. If you keep doing the same thing, right, you'll get the same result. So here's what the Canadian family physician said. It takes a 4-to-1 ratio, omega-6 to omega-3 to prevent cardiovascular disease, 2-to-1 to have an impact on cancer. That's published in the peer-reviewed literature. So here's a simple rule. I have said this, I bet every nutrition class that I've taught that had anything to do with omega-3s for now 26 years and running, you are omega-6 deficient, back off. You are omega-3 deficient until proven otherwise. And therefore, fish oils are absolutely one of the magnificent 7 that I recommend for every single patient. No doubt there's solid evidence that omega-3s have certain impact on cancer and can even enhance the efficacy of chemotherapy, whereas omega-6 can be a problem in cancer. So one of our amazing medical colleagues that's here, and hats off to anybody that has medical training that's actually in this group and open-minded to listen to it, but he said, I'd like you to re-emphasize that you could get people in big trouble if you tell people to jump ship from their medical treatment and jump over to what you're doing. In fact, you'd probably be practicing out of your scope. Now, good nutrition, I believe, is in everybody's scope here. If it's not, do whatever it takes to get it in your scope. But be respective of other boundaries and share good information. So Jeff Katulski was saying, you know, he gets on the phone with oncologists and they have a conversation, and Bob Burke has a book called Adversaries to Allies. And that's what they do. You honor where they are, but you stand your ground and you create a bridge with facts. And they're on the same page as us in terms of patient outcome. They just have it, you know, they want it. They want their patients to get better. They just don't have the same tools or training. So this is a big study on antioxidants and cancer therapy, 2016. They've only had one study ever that said that antioxidants were bad in combination with chemotherapy, and that was for lung cancer patients who still smoked and took exclusively beta-carotene. So that's one antioxidant. These antioxidants work in combination, and the bottom line is take all of the carotenoids. So you get them in, you know, orange and red and yellowish vegetables, and even though they call it dynamic fruits and greens, there's a lot of orange and red and yellow in there, and they're going to get the whole blend of carotenoids. And by the way, this is one of my favorite alkalizing strategies. And I would often have people do 20 scoops a day of dynamic fruits and greens until we get their pH where we want to have it. After people have cancer surgery, they actually find out that that is so stressful for them that they have a stress response with immunosuppression, especially suppression of the natural killer cells. So wouldn't it be a good idea to have that patient have immune support on hand? Wouldn't it be better to have anti-inflammatory support? Wouldn't it be better to buffer their cortisol, which we'll talk about? We do that with melatonin. Wouldn't it be better to give them a GABA facilitator so their brain isn't in fight or flight, triggering that stress response, and that would be theanine. And Nutridyne has a really great product called Calm Ease that helps with that. This is a simple graphic, and it shows blood flow at rest versus blood flow at fight or flight. So since there's 520 people here, there's a few people that I hadn't met before. So if I've never asked you this question before, who can look at that graph and tell me who gets most blood flow at rest in human physiology? Say it loud so the microphone can hear you. The liver. Think about that. The liver gets the most flow at rest. Who gets the second most? The kidneys. Who gets the third? The brain. Now I want you to think about that for a minute. If the liver and kidneys get the most blood flow at rest, and those are organs of detoxification, what is your body's highest priority when you're not fighting or fleeing? Detoxification. So even though in the first half someone really emphasized the importance of gut, which I'm really in favor of supporting the gut, and by the way, I'm not one guy that says, oh, today we're going to work on your gut. Tomorrow we're going to work on your detox. Next day we're going to work on your methylation. Why don't we do as much as possible and reasonable simultaneously and take advantage of that synergy? Because we can, and it's not forever. People aren't going to leave with a $1,000 supplement routine for week 52. That's week 1. It's easier to stay out of trouble than get out of trouble. And I always ask people, if you're going down a really bad path, which could ultimately lead to your demise, how quickly would you want to turn that around? Slow and steady in that case may not be the best strategy. But since the body's top priority is detox, detox is my top priority. Natural killer cells are suppressed by stress as well, so now we shut down the immune system as well. So when we have chronic distress, most of us have heard of insulin resistance, and that just means that bodies ignore constant stimuli. So I see people with glasses, and I'll wear sunglasses, but you know, I can tell you that it happens too often. I put my sunglasses on my head, and I'm looking around going, where are my sunglasses? And I'm thinking that's probably a universal thing. Well, bodies ignore constant stimuli. So, if you're constantly releasing cortisol, your cells downregulate cortisol receptors. Remember that cortisol has some good actions. It's a glucocorticoid, so you can release sugar to fight and flee. It's also an anti-inflammatory, so it buffers the inflammatory process. When your body is resistant to cortisol, the first thing you appear to lose is the ability to dampen the inflammatory process. So people become excessively and chronically inflamed. So here's what they said is when people have glucocorticoid resistance, they're suggesting that it should be mandatory to have anti-inflammatory therapy. Well, I would agree. They should have the right ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. They should supplement omega-3. There's plenty of botanical anti-inflammatories that have a really nice and health-promoting response. Step 7 in the metabolic approach to cancer is enhanced circulation while simultaneously inhibiting angiogenesis. So there's a powerful quote. It says this: a biochemical vampire, the cancer cell's nectar of choice is blood. So it's actually pulling the blood in, and it's actually going to steal nutrients and things like that, but it doesn't use the oxygen to create energy. So there's a dime there, and I show a millimeter scale next to it. So a dime is somewhere between 17 and 18 millimeters wide and only 1.3 millimeters thick. Notice what this says. In the absence, this is a peer-reviewed medical study, 2018, in the absence of new vasculature, tumor growth is normally limited to 1 or 2 millimeters. Now that's 1 or 2 cubic millimeters. So since I'm an engineering nerd, here's the formula for volume of a sphere, which I'm going to assume this tumor is round. That's not completely accurate. But it's 4/3 pi r cubed. Now you do the math and you take the maximum size of a tumor without new blood vessels, it's 0.78 millimeters, which is about half the thickness of a dime is the diameter of the sphere. Think about that for a minute. That's really small. Hypoxia is known to increase the expression of things that lead to angiogenesis. That makes sense. If you're not delivering oxygen, you want to create it. Now, this can be our friend. So has anybody here ever seen anybody that went to a hospital or had just a routine test and they go, oh my God, we're so glad we got to you now. Your left anterior descending was 99% clogged. Anybody ever hear that? But they don't have any symptoms. Even some people have said, well, it's 100% clogged. Why aren't you dead? Because the body sprouts its own bypass. Your heart knows it needs oxygen, and basically that plaquing occurred slowly, but the hypoxia was progressive along the way, and the body said, I better create some new routes. And it does. You create your own bypass with good nutrition, good movement, good exercise. So we'll read this one to you again. The tumor ecosystem remains a bustling interchange of tumor cells, secreted molecules, and native tissue elements, which they actually suggest is 50% of the tumor. Then acting together actually start leading towards a pro-angiogenic balance. So within the tumor, it's not all cancer. There's a mix, and about 50% of it is normal. So what are natural anti-angiogenic substances? Healthy fruits, vegetables, and even some proteins. Pretty powerful there. So just take a look at that list and see what's appealing to you. Why would tuna be anti-angiogenic? Probably the right ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. By the way, when the body is progressively alkaline, this is kind of interesting, there's something called a Bohr effect. I better clarify that statement. The body has a lot of buffers against acid. The primary buffer is actually bicarbonate. The body will start reabsorbing bicarbonate to buffer the acid, and it actually holds it in the blood. And as the blood becomes alkaline, the Bohr effect doesn't take effect, which means hemoglobin's ability to deliver oxygen is impaired, but it's actually a progressive hypoxic or acid condition of the body. So we always want to alkalize the body, which ultimately will create a blood system that delivers more oxygen more effectively. We certainly want to balance hormones. there's probably a little variation in opinion of what the master hormone is. I actually think it's cortisol. So remember that we have this section of our brain that's going to detect stress in the body, and it releases something called corticotropin releasing factor, which is going to stimulate adrenocorticotropin hormone, which is going to drive the adrenals to make cortisol. But that same control center also releases something called thyrotropin hormone and gonadotrophic hormone. So what happens is when stress is high, the thyroid and the gonads shut down. Cortisol opposes the action of insulin. We get into a circumstance where the endocrine system is really run by stress, so one of my favorite ways is actually to buffer the stress. So I would have put stress as the hormone hijacker as number one, but I'm going by what they said in their book. So they said hormones injected into animals, whether we get their meat or milk, hormone therapy, which I'll go with the FDA on that. They want to use the lowest dose for the shortest duration and ultimately prime the body to make its own, non-green cleaning supplies, and then the birth control pill. So by the way, I had a patient call me, and her 38-year-old daughter has a blood clot in her lung that they realized was from the birth control pill. Someone in town here had a really good friend that had a massive stroke that was very threatening, and it was determined to have been from the birth control pill. So we want to be careful about that. It's not as benign as you would think. And one of the things I said to this patient is that I would reach out to my colleagues and see if we had anybody medically minded with experience in that could lead her on better guidance. I said that, I probably recognize you have to be on medical blood thinners for a period of time, but anybody know how to navigate that or know someone who does? Just raise your hand and we can talk after. Not a lot. That's interesting. All right. Well, let's try to figure that out. Green products, 73% more green products, just whatever the year, since 2009. Pretty significant number. So, pretty good idea, relationships. All the ecosystems are interrelated. Deplete one ecosystem, you will deplete them all. So why not take care of all of them? I like this little graphic. Could hormone balancing be easier than we think? And I believe so. Go after the big four: stress, toxins, malnutrition, and physical inactivity. How do you recalibrate your stress hormones and biorhythms? This is a powerful statement. Stress is the most powerful carcinogen imaginable. That's a pretty powerful statement. Now, even people that really don't feel like they're under much stress, what I'll suggest to you, and this is what the literature says as well, I'll give you the quote right from the literature. It says this: many, if not all, New World primates have elevated cortisol and cortisol resistance. So why do we have elevated cortisol? Cortisol has a natural rhythm, but we'll show later that blue light, which is in nearly all the lights and all the unprotected smartphones and all the unprotected monitors, are actually hitting you most of your waking hours and shutting off melatonin. And melatonin is your primary buffer against cortisol. So these are all of the hallmarks of cancer. And notice that melatonin is going to help to create the anti-growth signals. It's going to help to promote apoptosis or programmed cell death of unhealthy cells. It'll reduce inflammation. It'll reduce angiogenesis. It'll reduce metastasis. It'll actually improve the function of the immune system and therefore prevent the probability of metastasis. It optimizes the mitochondria. In fact, melatonin is considered a mitochondrial-specific antioxidant. It'll actually keep in check the telomeres, which will control the amount of times a cell can divide. It will block the sustained signal that tries to create more and more cells, and it'll stabilize the genome. Melatonin is in every cell found, whether it's plant, animal, or even single-celled organism. If it's throughout the entire living ecosystem, wouldn't we think it'd be important? And then suddenly we know that blue light blocks melatonin. Most of us know we're wired for survival. When I teach brain chemistry, I use this simple analogy. It's like your brain is a Ferrari, and glutamate is the gas pedal, GABA is the brakes, but your steering wheel is actually the perception. So when we look, glutamine is the most abundant amino acid in muscle and plasma. It's only one step away from glutamate. When you can make something that fast, your body thinks it's important. Glutamate is important. Now notice that glutamate is only one step away from GABA. But it actually takes B6, which by the way is profoundly depleted by estrogen toxicity, and taurine to convert, because it runs the enzyme glutamic acid decarboxylase. Now taurine you don't ingest much of, you actually make it. And you actually make it from cysteine. But a lot of your cysteine comes from methionine, but some of it, the cysteine, is going to go to glutathione if you're oxidized, and a lot of the cysteine is going to go into something called metallothionein proteins, which are natural proteins that chelate out heavy metals. But I'll give you a quote from the medical literature. The modern skeleton has 500 to 1,000 times the lead of pre-industrialized humans. So we are likely not making much taurine, and therefore making more of these metallothioneins, which by the way also deplete zinc, which will mess up the digestion and the prostate and other things like, and the immune system, right? And so what goes on is we've created this toxic world that's made people sick. So Jay Lombard, when he and I taught a brain chemistry series, he said he believes this is the most common and severe abnormality, excess glutamate, not enough GABA. So he created a nice product called Trencor that converts glutamate to GABA. By the way, what blocks the conversion? Inflammation and cortisol. If we're all running high cortisol, we're all running high glutamate, or the neurotransmitter of fight or flight. And therefore, one of the ways we can deal with it is to transfer it into GABA, but also why not reduce the trigger as much as possible? And so things like breathing and meditation and finding purpose in life are all really, really good. So in the middle of this big biochemical chart is tryptophan. And tryptophan, when it takes one path, can go to 5-hydroxytryptophan that's related to serotonin and melatonin. But notice when you have inflammatory process or cortisol, or both, you shunt down something called the quinolinic acid cascade, which therefore steals the tryptophan away from what could be used into making serotonin and melatonin. And if we all have elevated cortisol, cortisol resistance, and therefore chronic inflammation, we're probably low on melatonin, which is likely our body's most powerful intrinsic anti-cancer molecule. So when I found all this wonderful stuff about melatonin, it was probably 8-9 years ago, I gave people what I called a stress reset. I'd actually give them melatonin every waking hour for about 7 to 10 days. We'll find later that 400x the melatonin is made in the gut and the brain, and therefore it likely doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. You know, we were taught a long time ago that the blood-brain barrier exists to keep toxins out of our brain. That's a little true, but fat-soluble toxins readily cross the blood-brain barrier, and most environmental toxins are fat-soluble. But the purpose of the blood-brain barrier is quite simply to keep in your brain what's in your brain and in your body what's in your body. So glutamate in the peripheral nervous system is the neurotransmitter of pain. So if I happen to be walking and accidentally stub my toe, that glutamate release could cause a seizure in me. So we're glad we have the blood-brain barrier. By the way, healthier people have more intact barriers. But let's go to this stress. There's universal agreement that 50 to 75% of all depression is stress-induced. Cortisol does suck serotonin out of the synapse, so it's like a vacuum cleaner for serotonin. Remember that the whole body is going to shut down, and especially the brain. Notice that the brain took a big hit in blood flow under a stress circumstance. Your higher level processes are no longer nourished by blood and nutrition. Your joy processes are no longer nourished by blood and nutrition, but your brainstem, which runs the reflex response, is what's going on. So it's been said we have 3 brains. We actually have a reptilian brain, we have a mammalian brain, and then we have the human brain. So what are the universal stressors of the brain? I'm going to suggest that bad news is a universal stressor. Now, it's not the news, it's the bad news. And so a long time ago, one of my mentors said, and I never really had a big problem with this, but he said, Bob, just do a complete and total news fast. So I bet I'm 5 years running on news fast, except for something that happens to catch my eye when I'm looking up something on the internet, right? Other than that, I haven't watched any news. So guess how many things happened in the last 5 years that I needed the news to tell me about? Just out of curiosity. 0. Someone said there was a hurricane. I go, I know, I was there. Weren't you surprised by it? No, I saw these big lines at the gas station. And when I went to the grocery store, everybody was filling up their shopping carts with water. And I said, what's going on? Well, they said a hurricane. Okay, when's it coming? Soon. I'll be ready, you know. Well, you could watch these hurricane trackers. And my poor mother-in-law sat in front of the TV for days crying, thinks we were dying, you know. It hit a couple hundred miles away from us, but it kept circling and dumping water, 53 inches in 3 days, but we had 6 properties in 4 neighborhoods, and only 1 had to be defended. None of them took a drop. But with that bad news, I don't know what it did to her, but it wasn't good. If you're calling crying, you're going to die, you're going to die. No, we're not. Not now. Not anytime soon, probably. If we do, we're okay with it. We're never offline. We don't unplug. And then we've got blue light. So this is an amazing study. My associate doctor was actually at the Boston Marathon when the bomb went off. I talked to a woman the other night who was at the Boston Marathon when the bomb went off. So the girl that finished in 3:01, brilliant runner, she's a chiropractor as well, Megan Ping, she says, yeah, I was done way before that went off. They rang it at 4 hours when most people were going to finish. But my associate doc, you know, she and her family, they went, oh my God, that was a bomb, you know. Well, anyways, people that were actually there, they tested them for post-traumatic stress disorder. And there was a boom, and there was a scuffle, and there was police, and there was all kinds of stuff, and they couldn't leave for a while. So they were in it. But people that watched replays or 6 hours of news on the Boston bombing had more post-traumatic stress disorder than the people that were actually there. So this really brilliant thinker, and I read his book. I like to read what the top people in the world are reading. So Bill Gates recommended this book called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. So I read that. And then he also wrote Homo Deus, saying that humans are going to seek for longer life and better life. And then 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, all good books. But he was saying a terrorist is like someone with a really weak hand. And all they can do is bluff to get you to overreact. And, you know, we have more people die every single day from not addressing cancer that were killed in the last decade of terrorist attacks. But they get a lot of news. They just try to get people to overreact. And they said a terrorist is like a Hollywood director. How can we get the most attention to create the biggest scare? But reality is they got nothing. If they had something, they'd attack. But they're cowards and they stage a screenplay. And here's what he said, if we buy into it, we just overreacted to their bluff. I'm not saying turn a blind eye to it, but don't give it any more attention than it deserves. And it's probably education and poverty that will ultimately take terrorism away, right? That's what the sages say. Not fighting. That just fuels it. So, when people started living together and clustering together, they started getting infections. When people started living in tight quarters and creating cities that created pollutant, they got cancer. But this guy, who's actually the head of the Kissinger Foundation, if you remember Henry Kissinger from way back when, he wrote a book called The Seventh Sense. And he actually said the seventh sense was connectivity. But if you keep firing your brain too much, you'll create insanity. The brain needs to unplug. By the way, the sixth sense is balance, right? Most of us think sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. Those are the 5, but balance is 6. Think about what you'd be without it. And then the 7th is actually connectivity. So here's the details on blue light. The use of electronic devices which emit blue light during the evening hours are known to interfere with sleep disturbance. So shut off that TV, shut off that computer, shut off your smartphone. Give yourself at least an hour or more to let your rhythms normalize. Blue light is the absolute most powerful at inhibiting melatonin. So, by the way, Thomas Edison, I don't know how many times he failed before he created the light bulb. Some say 10,000, some say 1,000. Let's just say it's a lot. But I heard a funny behind-the-scenes story, and they said, you know why Thomas Edison was so dedicated to making the light bulb? And the word was he was really afraid of the dark. So he had a why. That's fascinating. But nonetheless, red and yellow and orange, which, by the way, is what firelight is, has no negative impact on melatonin. Isn't that fascinating? So we could replace all of our bulbs with red, yellow, and orange. And we could create filters on our phones and screens and TVs if you use them. So many people suffer from sleep disturbance, but Anders Ericsson, who's the world authority in peak performance at all levels of athletes and people, he said the best of the best of the best sleep an average of 8.6 hours a night. So if you're going to be your best, you need to rest your body. You absolutely do. I've said this now for decades. Many, if you're not running on stress hormones, back off. If you're not running on rest and recovery, you're running on stress hormones, which are catabolic and immunosuppressive. There's a reference. Many, if not all, New World primates have elevated cortisol and cortisol resistance. So this idea of unplugging, getting away from blue light, getting away from EMFs, getting away from electronics should be a daily ritual. The data is there now where it seems that we should do that on a very regular basis. Deep breathing. I think I've now read about 8 different books by Navy SEALs. And it's amazing that these guys in the heat of battle are actually trained to take a deep breath to center themselves and focus. Isn't that interesting? So even in some of the more stressful circumstances that anybody could imagine, the most trained and the most capable in those circumstances take a deep breath. It might be a good rule anytime you feel your feathers being ruffled. There's some people that are just really good at pushing our buttons. You know, take a deep breath, relax, smile. By the way, there's a book called The Art of Connection, and the author's name is Michael Gelb. And he's a 7th degree black belt in Keto. And his grandmaster would teach him, if you just take a deep breath and kind of smile at the guy that's giving you a little grief, they'll back down. They just go, either this guy's nuts, or he knows something, or he's got friends, but he's not intimidated. I'm not messing with him. What an interesting philosophy, right? A beautiful smile and a calm appearance can go a long way. And speaking of beautiful smiles, I'm going to still say that this is one of the most beautiful smiles I've ever seen. There's a book called The Happiness Advantage, and by the way, different things make different people happy, and stuff only makes you happy to a certain point. And then it wears off pretty quick. They call that hedonic adaptation. But the best way to be happy is to give happy, right? Give happy, live happy. So now melatonin, this is a really powerful reference. This is not brand new. This is 2003. Melatonin inhibits adrenocorticotropin stimulated cortisol production. So when your brain is trying to run your body in fight or flight, melatonin is the antidote. It literally binds to the adrenal cortex and buffers that stress drive. It's almost universal. When I get a new patient who's struggling, we are going to give them a week-long melatonin reset, maybe 7 to 10 days. Melatonin every waking hour. It shouldn't cross the blood-brain barrier. Sometimes people want to fall asleep after a dose of melatonin. What's going on? Do they have a leaky brain? Maybe. Are they so used to running on stress hormones that you pull the plug on their stress hormones, their body doesn't have anything to run on? Maybe. but neither of those are good. So it's almost universal. But what about my police officers? I probably don't want them sleeping on duty. But they're not on duty 24/7, so they take it after work, they take it over the long weekend. My surgeons, my pilots, they don't take it during work, but they take it to reset their system in times where they can have some downtime. The gut has 400 times the melatonin as the brain, and therefore it likely does not cross the blood-brain barrier. So melatonin every hour, melatonin every hour, melatonin every hour. Why every hour? Well, actually, I once read that the half-life of melatonin was about an hour. I updated my research on that. It's anywhere from 20 minutes, some people will process it really fast, to certainly over an hour. Just like cortisol. The half-life of cortisol in healthy people is much less than the half-life in sick people. Isn't that fascinating? So we will process things at different rates in our body. Theanine, which is normally in green tea, you can get a really good supplement with that, crosses the blood-brain barrier, is a really powerful GABA facilitator, and that can calm your brain and also reduce anxiety. I really like theanine. So some of you maybe heard me tell this. I'm trying to think of, I had an A-list celebrity client who went through a really bad divorce, like a $100 million divorce. And some of my patients, like the A-listers, and really, I should really say that all my patients are A-listers, but they have my cell phone, right? And so he calls me, he says, Bob, if the next person looks at me wrong, I'm just going to punch him right in the face. I said, all right, where are you? He says, I'm outside of Whole Foods. I said, all right, go into Whole Foods, ask someone where the theanine is. People know you're good for it. Open the bottle and pound some immediately. Grab some off the shelf, drink it, wash it down, and continue to take, whatever I said, 500 milligrams every 15 minutes until you feel better. So he calls me back about 15 minutes later. He goes, wow, or no, 30 minutes later. He says, what was in that? I said, well, it's just a natural calming agent. Why do you ask? He goes, you know what? I feel so much better. How much of that can I do? Well, you can do as much of that as you need to do. I don't know that there's a theanine toxicity. By the way, you can give an animal 1/3 of their body weight in melatonin in a single dose, and there's no known toxicity. So this stuff is safe. Linus Pauling said it best. He said, these natural molecules have such powerful efficacy and such a broad dose range by which they're still safe. So when I would teach the 48-hour nutrition course, I would put up the poison control database. They said there were 60 billion doses of nutraceuticals taken annually in the U.S., and no deaths from nutrient overdose. Isn't that fascinating? This stuff is really safe. The book is called Lights Out. The environment through light, food, and stress flips the switches on genes to produce hormones, which in turn flip other genes for growth, death, or repair on and off. Light is a major switch. And guess what? We should have some on time and we should have some off time. If we don't get enough downtime, enough sleep, enough of rest and recovery, pretty powerful quote, exhaustion makes wimps of all of us. So that S on Superman's chest, it's actually for sleep. He honors himself. He has his wind-down routine. He has his electronic sunset. He has his dark, cool, quiet room. He may use a little theanine, a little melatonin, a little valerian, passion flower, magnesium, whatever makes you happy. And he goes to sleep. And he wakes up brand new and ready to take on the world the next day. So certainly sleep is associated with quality life, but I like this. A great night leads to a great day, leads to a great night, leads to a great day. Get into that cycle. So what's the best way to have a great tomorrow? Be refreshed and ready by honoring your body tonight. So I really like this analogy. You actually want to have more reasons to wake up than you do to stay up. Because most people out there are staying up for mindless entertainment. That can't trump your life purpose. Well, it can. I don't recommend that it does. I don't recommend that mindless entertainment keep you from being your best and honoring the world as only you can. So here's Tom Rath. Here's the guy that had that cancer that he lost an eyeball at 15, and he's got tumors all over his body, and he wrote the book Eat, Move, and Sleep. He also wrote Are You Fully Charged? And these are really good books. This guy's a great researcher. So by the way, I do think a background in health maybe helps you to understand the literature, but it's not required. There's some brainiacs out there that don't mind looking up words they don't understand, and they put it together, and they have really phenomenal ability to connect the dots and make it make sense. Tom Rath is one of those guys. Brian Johnson is one of those guys. Our patients need those guys. So if you're running on empty, you're not going to have a very good life. This was an Army study. Soldiers that slept less than 6 hours a night for 6 straight days actually function with the same capacity as if they were legally drunk. Now, how often do you think soldiers in a tight circumstance are sleep deprived? How about almost all the time? By the way, when I read these books about the Navy SEALs, they have something called Hell Week. And they just really put them through it. And I think they, maybe in a week, get about 4 hours sleep. So these people are wired differently than me. You know, in my tough days, I thought maybe, wow, that'd be cool, you know, because I like pushing myself. Until you deprive me of one night's sleep. Then I'm a different guy the next day. 2, oh, forget it, right? So I wasn't wired that way. Just by a show of hands, for who here is sleep their number one personal care habit? Raise your hand up nice and high. So we have a room of healthcare providers, and that's only about 40% if you're raising your hands, right? So you got to eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right, and prioritize those things. I say do all of them every day, but certainly your number one priority for personal care should be your number one priority. So peer-reviewed medical study, you cannot substitute for sleep with good diet or the right type of exercise. You just can't. You need sleep. Here's an interesting thought. Circadian rhythm is predominantly regulated by motion. So I've taught in Sweden many times, and there's a part of Sweden that has 40 days and 40 days of light in the summer, 40 days of dark in the winter. And I was actually sharing a room in downtown Stockholm with Peter Wilhelmsson, great guy, sponsored one of my seminars. And I get there and I'm jet lagged, and I basically keep myself open all day and eat right and get some fresh air, but then I go to bed early and I plan on being in bed a long, long time. We just happen to be sharing a room, and I fall asleep, and I feel like I'm out. And all of a sudden I hear some ruffling in the room, and I wake up, and there's Peter kind of moving around, and I look, and it's still bright light outside, really bright. And I looked at Peter, I said, what time is it? He said, it's 10:30. And I didn't think I was sleeping that long, so I said, AM or PM? He said, PM. I said, it's still light outside. He goes, yeah, it will be for a few more hours. So there's ways you can get light blocking shades and stuff like that, but really it's your movement. So what's my takeaway on that? Don't move around too much at bedtime, not too aggressively. It'll actually wake your body up. There's your references on melatonin again. And so we make melatonin. There's tryptophan, which becomes serotonin, which becomes melatonin, which becomes another metabolite called dimethyltyramine, which, by the way, can be profoundly hallucinogenic. And there's some plants that have it in it, like the plant ayahuasca. And so the shaman in South America will actually think that they have these incredible spiritual experiences. Maybe they do, but they're actually promoting very powerful hallucinogenic. I think some mushrooms have it in it too. But this is a natural molecule, and we do make it. So I believe that we are endowed with an intrinsic ability to create our own reality in our mind first, and then maybe around us. Isn't that fascinating? We have a fantasy chemistry built in. But notice, if you're stressed out of your mind, you're never going to access that. If you're inflamed, you're never going to access that. If you're toxic, you're never going to access that. If you don't have the right amount of nutrition, you're never going to access that. There's the animal study. 800 milligrams per kilogram body weight. That's more than 1/3 of your body weight. That's actually 40% of your body weight in melatonin does not cause toxicity in animal studies. So don't be too worried about pretty good doses of melatonin. By the way, you might guess I really like melatonin. Most nights I take 50 milligrams, time release, and I have for well over a decade. And myself, I don't notice anything but great with it. And by the way, the National Cancer Institute has great studies too. Out-of-the-box cancer therapies. The foreword was written by John Forsyth, who is an oncologist who is conventionally trained. And here's what he said. From the early 1970s until the mid-1990s, I practiced only conventional oncology, which today I realize was only enlightened, in quotes, guessing game. Many of my patients who had homeopathic and naturopathic therapies were alive longer with higher qualities of life than my conventionally treated patients. So there's a doctor in Houston, Texas, who used to run the chelation centers of Texas, and her clinic was behind mine. And she spent a good portion of her career working in hospice. And she had an epiphany when some of these families would release some of these cancer patients just as they told them to get some fresh air, and suddenly they started recovering, and they got out of hospice. I love this story. You can confirm it with Dr. Dorothy Merritt. But she said, finally, I started talking to some of these patients, and they were going to this guy named Dr. Rakowski. I kid you not. I've had plenty of patients, as you've seen them on video, who were sent home to die 20 years ago. And they're alive today because of a metabolic approach to cancer. There's really nothing new under the sun. And the natural philosophy is the more you honor your body, the more you honor nature, the more you honor everybody, the greater probability you have for at least a delicious existence, if not a longer existence. So here's what Dr. Forsyth did. He actually went back to school and got a degree also in naturopathic medicine. And here's what he said. As an integrative oncologist, I've carried out 4 separate outcome-based studies. My latest began in June 2010, has continued for over 7.5 years, involving over 1,250 patients who thus far have a survival rate of 70%. That's a pretty good number. So what he'll tell you is that for some cancers, medicine has something to offer. And we should honor that and work with it and work with the patient and work with the oncologist and do things that actually make the medicine work better while protecting the patient. I like this movie. I like a lot of movies. This was Rampage. And you might wonder why I use this graphic. So here's from the book Out of the Box Cancer Therapies. It says, a primary consideration is what are the chances of survival with standard cancer therapies for this type of cancer. If there's a very high survival rate, then it is often wise to seriously consider the standard protocols while adding a well-rounded integrative oncology program. So if you've got something really ferocious and dangerous, you better get some ferocious, dangerous weapons if you know that there's a probability of them helping. So remember the statement, we can kill any cancer, we just throw your body into a 5,000 degree blast furnace. We'll kill every cancer cell. You don't want the side effects. If we're going to put some really big guns attacking so much in your body, which is pretty much indiscriminate, why don't we protect you as much as possible? Get the big guns on our side. So this is a 2018 PubMed ID. I'll read it to you word for word. After more than 40 years of clinical use, its efficacy, safety, and long-term tolerability have been recognized by neurologists. It's one of the few non-hormonal drugs used for treating refractory myopathy. In addition, it reduces adverse reactions and improves the quality of life for cancer patients during chemotherapy. That is the herb Ganoderma, which is absolutely one of my favorites. Chemoresistance. Most of us have heard of antibiotic resistance. You don't give enough antibiotic or a long enough course, the bacteria learns to fight against the antibiotic. That's called antibiotic resistance. Insulin resistance. You give too much, over a period of time, the body ignores the effect. Cortisol resistance, we talked about that. There's also chemo resistance. So we know that aggressive cancer cells can become chemo resistant. Ganoderma prevents chemo resistance. So when I played the video of Anna Marie, and she said, okay, I went through the conventional therapy, but oddly enough, I had tons of energy. It worked really, really well. My body didn't break down. My family said, why are we praying for you? You have all the energy. You look so good. We did a full program, but we dosed her mega with this, every waking hour, especially during those weeks. I could give you a reference. If we alkalize the environment around the tumor, we decrease probability of metastasis and we enhance the efficacy of chemotherapy. Dynamic fruits and greens, megadoses, 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 until we become alkalized. Then we help the chemo do its job. I have done a number of consults, and some with doctors in this room that beat cancer. We're not going to violate the patient confidentiality, but I had a very young patient who was basically given no hope, and at the time we had access to intravenous bicarb solutions. And we had her do infusions of bicarb before chemotherapy, and vitamin C and bicarb after. This stage 4 cancer was gone in 8 months. She didn't lose a lock of hair, and her kids never knew she was sick, and she didn't miss a day of work. That's good integrative cancer therapies. By the way, Ganoderma for the chemotherapy, doxorubicin, is known to damage the heart. When they give cancer patients Ganoderma and doxorubicin, they kill their cancer better but don't damage their heart. When they give cancer patients who are giving cisplatin, which is known to damage the kidneys, Ganoderma, they beat their cancer more effectively and they don't damage their kidneys. What about radiation? It also enhances the killing effect of radiation. So I think, and so do other people in the medical literature, that this is the top superfood on the planet. 3,000 plus peer-reviewed medical studies, 2,000 years of clinical use, no problems, right? So Dan Rubin, co-founder of the American Board of Naturopathic Oncology. I maintain the opinion that naturopathic oncology as a whole is not very good at killing cancer cells. What we are good at is causing cancer cells to die. It's a more gentle approach. Instead of becoming immortal, they will die. Experts state periodic fasting creates a protective environment for normal cells. How do we know this? The number one mechanism of longevity ever studied, every animal species, doesn't matter, calorie restriction. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Oxidation, combustion is an act or instance of burning. Slow oxidation is in the animal body. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Where there's fire, there's smoke. When you're burning food, you're creating smoke that'll poison your body. Burn less food, create less smoke, poison your body less. And this is really critical in the cancer circumstance. So, periodic fasting lasting 2 days or more can be a highly effective strategy to protect normal cells and organs from a variety of toxic and toxic conditions while increasing the death of many cancer cell types. How many people here have done at least a 2-day fast once in their life? And notice you're all alive, right? It doesn't kill you. So isn't that fascinating? I'm telling you, we could all do a 2-day fast. And we could do it once a month if we wanted. Or we could just be on an intermittent fasting protocol, which I'm a big fan of. And when I study Wim Hof's work, anybody study Wim Hof, the Iceman, who goes in these freezing temperatures? That was my kick last year. And I did a cold plunge, and even in my pool when it was snowing, and my cold, it's not like Minneapolis. The water temperature was 36, the air was 32. I went swimming, and I actually did it on Facebook Live. And, it wasn't so bad. I was trained for it. But what's amazing is Wim Hof only eats in a 5-hour window. And he's just amazing. Not only does he handle the cold, he seems to be pretty good at making life better. Radical remission. This girl got her PhD, this woman got her PhD in cases of radical remission. And literally, she now has over 1,500 cases of people that beat cancer against the odds. So here's what she said. I asked all oncologists I meet if they've ever seen a case of radical remission in their practice. So far, every single one of them has answered yes. I then asked if they took the time to publish the case or cases in an academic journal. So far, each one has answered no. They're busy, especially now. There's so much of this going on, so we're good that she came in from the outside and took a look. But basically, she said, if we look at this, we're going to learn something and maybe find a cure for cancer. And so we got to put intense effort into this. So basically, I used the case of Semmelweis. So Semmelweis is the came up with the idea of hand washing. So he asked a really odd question. Back then, they would do autopsies on everybody. They might even have used the same knife and didn't wash their hands, and they go do surgery on a normal patient, or they might go without washing their hands, go deliver a baby. And so Semmelweis had made the observation that any baby born in the hospital, especially born to a doctor, had a serious chance of dying, and so did the mom. If it was born in the hospital but to a midwife, that risk was reduced by about 66%. But if they were born out of the hospital to a midwife, it was about 1 in 20 the probability of the baby dying. So he asked an unusual question. His question was this: are doctors killing babies? It sounded like a ridiculous question. But it was a teaching hospital, and they did autopsies on everybody that died, and his favorite teacher was doing an autopsy on a mom that had died from a post-childbirth fever, and while he was doing the autopsy, he cut his hand. 2 weeks later, he died from the exact same symptoms that this mom had died from. So they had the idea that dead bodies were transferring to human bodies something that they called cadaveric particles, which they thought would promote death. So he came up with this ridiculous idea. Maybe we should wash our hands after an autopsy before delivering a baby. Go look at the story. He was sentenced to an insane asylum where he died for coming up with such a ridiculous idea. It took 50 years. We laugh now. It took 50 years to figure that out. It's taken over 100 years to find out that cancer is a metabolic disease. And there have been trillions of dollars spent on it. As Deepak Chopra said, more people will make a living from cancer than will die from it. Upton St. Clair said this: it's very difficult to get a man to understand something when his livelihood depends on him not understanding it. I know you're chasing that biochemical pathway, but it has nothing to do with the big picture. Too bad I got $1 million grant. Studying anomalies is what has led to so many breakthroughs in medicine. So radical remission, 1,500 cases, here are the 9 things in common. May sound familiar. Radically change your diet. Phytonutrient dense, low glycemic index with the right amount of protein. So someone was asking about mTOR, mammalian target of rapamycin. It promotes growth and differentiation. It is stimulated by protein and amino acids. There's more than one type of mTOR, but it is implicated in some forms of cancer. I'm not fully convinced that protein is a major source of cancer. I'm just not. However, I do know there's a sweet spot for everything. Everybody should get the right amount and not too much or too little. That could depend on your physiology, your demands, your genetics, everything else. Let's just say don't overdo the protein. But don't underdo it either, or your body will break down. Take control of your health. Take full responsibility. So when I interviewed Sachin Patel about cancer, he says, well, it can be a teacher. And he has a really nice integrated place called the Living Proof Institute. But he says, I like to ask patients this question. Did you get cancer or did you create cancer? Because if you got cancer, you're a victim. If you're a creator, you're empowered to create the opposite. Powerful question. Follow your intuition. There's some people that just plain know that Coca-Cola and Doritos is not the right thing for a cancer patient to consume regularly. It's just not. Use herbs and supplements with expert guidance. Increase your positive emotions. Release your suppressed emotions. There's peer-reviewed medical studies that show that all of these are effective strategies. Embrace social support. Deepen your spiritual connection. And have a strong reason for living. The ketogenic diet we've talked about again and again and again. Low glycemic index, phytonutrient dense, not too much protein. Maximize your omega-3s. Take control of your health. It says I am are two of the most powerful words. I think the most powerful 10-word sentence that all the 10 words are only 2 letters are this: if it is to be, it is up to me. That's someone that's taking charge of what's going on in their world. I've got or I caught is very different than I created. So when Nelson Mandela was sitting in this prison camp or prison cell for over 20 years before he turned around South Africa, basically he said every single day he went through this poem, which is actually called Invictus, and they made a movie of it. And the final line is this: I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. I created means you can uncreate. By the way, this is the origin of the word patient. Look up the etymology of patient, and here's what it says. Middle English or Old French, or from Latin, it means suffering. To be a patient means you are suffering. And so the peer-reviewed medical literature basically came up with this article that said, do we need a new word for patience? Do we want people suffering? Do we want people submitting? Or do we want people empowered, ready to take on the world in whatever condition they're dealing with? Intellect, it said, it comes from your conscious mind. Intuition comes from your heart. So James Allen wrote in the book, As a Man Thinketh, I believe it's a proverb as well, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Does your heart think? I will tell you it does. And so does your liver, and so does your kidneys, and they're all in communication. But your heart of hearts is the soul of your being. And you need to get in touch with that and follow that. So this book is called The Tools. It's written by 2 psychiatrists. And I listened to Phil Stutt's story. He got out of school from a very reputable school that was teaching psychiatry. And he had a patient that had abandonment issues. And she went up to him and she says, well, I have abandonment issues. And he goes, well, let's go back to your childhood. What happened? She goes, listen, I've talked to psychiatrists about that for a year. I already know, or for years, I already know what happened in my childhood. I don't care about going through that again. I want techniques to get better. And then Phil Stutz goes, oh, crap, they didn't teach me that. So we went back to his mentors at this great university. And he said his worst of fears were confirmed. They didn't have a strategy for that. They didn't have a tool for people to get better. Let's just hash over the garbage of the past, shall we? Oh, why don't we just move past it? Right? You're going down the road, you got your GPS, and it goes, oh, you're going the wrong way, you're going the wrong way. You don't have to trace back to where you got to figure out when it went why. Start going the right direction. There's no need to go back most of the time, right? So he came up with 5 tools, and one of those things is grateful flow. He says if you've got a black cloud over you, just become grateful. And gratitude will just make your spirit smile. And your whole being will become more alive. It's like there's a crack in the black cloud for lights to come through. Gratitude boosts the immune system. Stress suppresses the immune system. What about balanced integrative therapy? So here's the title of this study: Colon Cancer Survival with Herbal Medicine and Vitamins Combined with Standard Therapy in a Whole Systems Approach. 10-year follow-up data analyzed with marginal, structural, and propensity score models. Here's what they found. When people took basically herbs and vitamins combined with conventional therapy, their risk of, they reduced the risk of death with stage 1 cancer by 95%, with stage 2 by 64%, with stage 3 by 29%, and with stage 4 by 75%. Those are pretty good numbers. Doesn't matter where the stage, early really good, late really good. I don't really know what happened to the stage 3 people, but those are really good numbers. A very well-controlled study. You want to increase your optimism. Remember psychoneuroimmunology? Every single receptor in the central nervous system is in the immune system. They're affected by the exact same chemicals. They're derived from the same embryologic tissue. The immune system is a circulating nervous system. Positive emotions are good for your brain, body, and immune system. 12-year study. There's a PubMed ID on it. Suppressed emotions increase the risk of cancer death by 170%. 12-year study. Let it go. Just let it go. Just let it go. T.D. Jakes, who's a preacher, he's got a really nice YouTube video, and it's called The Stumbling Something or Other. But he said this person just sat there and whined for 38 years because something happened 38 years ago. Yeah, someone stole my girlfriend, and that's why I'm a failure. 38 years, when did it happen? 38 years ago. Why didn't you succeed? Well, they laughed at me. When was that? 38 years ago. Really? Let it go. He does such a good job sharing that. Really beautiful story. Embrace social support. Isolated women, 64% more likely to die from breast cancer. 11-year study. Relationships, relationships, relationships. Nourish yourself with relationships, including relationships with the force that turns the planets and keeps the solar system good. Enhance your spiritual connectivity. And it's the Annals of Oncology. Here's what it said. Integrating spirituality as an essential domain of care will result in better health outcomes and quality of life in cancer patients. Peer-reviewed medical journal. And then have a strong reason to live. The first major conference that I lectured at was in the early 1990s. The keynote speaker was Bernie Siegel, and he was presenting the data on love, medicine, and miracles, and I went right after him. How fun was that? I like to say he was my opening act. But he said, I know who's going to live and who's not. They answered the question, do you want to live to be 100? So some of you have heard this story. My first year, couple of years in clinical practice, I sent all the cancer patients out, but I was interested and I wanted to see what they were doing. And I saw what people did, and it wasn't much. So I thought, well, let's look into that. So I spent a good year studying cancer, and all that stuff was around 25 years ago. We knew ketogenic was good. We knew immune support was good. We knew plant nutrients were good. We knew managing stress was good. We knew detoxing was good. We knew pancreatic enzymes were good. We knew coffee enzymes were good. And I wasn't seeing anybody that put it all together, so I said, all right, next patient, cancer patient that asks me for nutrition support, I'm going to give them nutrition support. So I have this woman come in, and it's her third bout of cancer. She now has cancer in her jaw, and they wanted to do chemo and radiation over the summer. And so she comes in and she says, look, my daughter's going to be in town from Israel this summer. I really don't want to be sick all summer, so maybe you can help me get healthy for chemotherapy in the fall. I said, all right, I'll do my best. So I just, got back from hearing Bernie Siegel and reading his book. I go, well, let me ask you a question. She goes, sure. I said, do you want to live to be 100? She goes, oh, no way. I go, all right, he didn't say what I'm supposed to do then. So I go, all right, so at least I can think on my feet a little bit. I go, how long do you want to live? She goes, well, I want to live 13 years. I said, what happens then? She says, my youngest grandson will have his bar mitzvah. I want to be there. I said, well, let's get you there. So we put her on a really good program, all the things that I just described, which is most of what the radical remissions did. And then in the fall, she went to the major cancer hospital in downtown Houston for her pre-chemo workup. And guess what they found? Nothing. A radical remission. So you know what? The data's been there for a long, long time. And many people have beat it, and many more will. But I think we'll beat a lot more if we actually commit to working together and really understanding the process. So Bernie Siegel, if you see what you do each day as your way of loving the world and helping it heal, then life gets to be a lot different. The difference between burning up and burning out is the difference between loving what you are doing and not loving it. So, I've always said that when patients come in, they want to know the answers to 4 questions. What's causing the problem? Can I help? How long does it take? How much does it cost? The 5 questions that I want to answer as their doctor is, how complex is the case? How strong and resilient is the patient? Is there anything in the chemistry you need to address? Is there an unresolved trauma or infection? Or is there anything else? So if we go back to this cancer system, what's causing the problem? We have created an oncosphere on this planet. We have intoxicated it. We've decreased the nutrients. We've suppressed our melatonin with artificial lights. We're probably not as connected to our spirituality or our purpose as we should be. And all these things are known to cause the problem. So can I help? Well, here's my answer always, and I'll still keep you consistent with that. I don't know, but I'll try. But we've seen radical remissions every single year in clinical practice. Every single year, and I videotaped and shared a couple just from last month to you. One beat stage 4 melanoma with only a surgery to remove a massive mass. The other beat stage 4 breast cancer metastasized all over her body with a blend of really good integrative oncology, really was never sick, and has more energy and feels better than she has in decades. That's a good protocol. I don't know, but I'll try. How long will it take? Someone asked me the other day, how long will it take? My answer, as long as it takes. I will until. How long do you think it's a good idea to make healthier choices? Maybe for a week. Maybe not. Why don't we just find a way to make that in our life? How much will it cost? I love this quote from Red Adair, the famous oil field firefighter. He says, if you think hiring an expert is expensive, try hiring an amateur. You're fighting for your life. Oh, you don't want to spend $5 extra on good quality supplements? You don't want to spend $100 extra on good quality advice? How complex is the case? Cancer's complex. We get cancer every hour of our life. We should be controlling it. We should be good at that. In this case, there's a lot of systems that had to break down. How resilient is the patient? Bioimpedance analysis, phase angle. I think I saw Charles Hughes out there with BIAs. Nutridyne still promoting BIAs, right? Any BIA deal at this conference? Whatever we want. So I'll turn that one over to my advisor, Greg, right? He'll come up with a deal. I guarantee you some kind of product bonus for a BIA purchase, right? It's going to be really, really good for you. He'll come up with the number. But BIA gives the phase angle. Now I call them the dirty dozen, the 12 things that rob our health. When we look at process-oriented nutrition, we address processes, not values. I rarely do onesie-twosie nutrition. Rarely. When it comes to all the fabulous 50, I want to give them all together through really good diet, really good superfoods, really good medical foods, a comprehensive multi. We're going to do omega-3s because everybody's omega-3 deficient until proven otherwise. We're going to do probiotics because we have destroyed the microbiome, at least in 99.999% of people. And then D3K2, especially up here, is really, really good. But those actually address all of the dirty dozen. We can do other things for infection. I first created my life pyramid after Barry Sears put up the USDA food pyramid, and I put love at the bottom of mine. And I can't go a presentation without saying, I will greet this day with love in my heart, for love is the greatest secret of success in all ventures. Muscle will split a shield and even destroy life, but only the unseen power of love will open the hearts of men. And until I master that art, I will remain no more than a peddler in the marketplace. And I will love the sun, and I will love the stars, and I will love the moon, and I will love the earth, and I will love everybody on it. And most of all, I will love myself. For when I do, I will zealously inspect all things that I allow to enter my mind, my heart, my soul, and my body. And that is the ultimate formula. So if you would, repeat after me, and most of all. Let's try that again, everybody, and most of all. I will love myself. For when I do, I will zealously inspect all things, all things, all things that I allow to enter my mind, my heart, my soul, and my body. There's the Magnificent Seven pyramid. Here are the Dirty Dozen. Here are the best Nutridyne products, which is clearly showing that they are the premier company in the industry. Look at the PAC conference. Look at the quality people they bring in. These are my three favorites, or my favorites in each of the categories of stress, toxins, sugar management, inflammatory process, methylation, which this one's more geared towards really being an anti-cancer solid nutrient, the immune system, infection. I've actually used very, very similar formulas to these for 25 plus years. Nutridyne's made it more readily available to you in this market, really solid, proven formulas. Digestion, of course, there's a 4-hour program, but those are my favorites. Food reaction, hormones. DHEA is the first hormone that's depleted in chronic distress. Remember, hormones, whether you make them or whether you take them, you need to detoxify them every single day. For mitochondrial support, and finally, heavy metals. And we've finished with enough time for you to teach your neighbor your top pearl from this half of the lecture. Have your neighbor teach you their top pearl. We'll do a little review, we'll wrap it up, and we'll give you fabulous marching orders to make the world better. So just a few minutes on that part. Yes, sir.
We get to look at Slido.
Oh, beautiful. I'll look at that. Thank you, Ned. Okay. All right, we're back on. Who would like to offer a pearl from this hour? And then I'm actually going to answer the questions that came in. A pearl from the hour. Anybody, anything? Someone's got one. Lauren Stoner has one. What is it?
Good.
Melatonin is good. And by the way, one of the questions was this. Is it possible to suppress your body's own production? Sure, of course it is. But if the gut makes 400 times the level as the brain, and the half-life is maybe 20 to 50 minutes, your body's actually pretty good at making that all the time. Secondly, I believe most people that swallow it are not going to have it cross the blood-brain barrier unless they have a leaky brain. So in theory, it shouldn't affect your pineal. So when I do this every waking hour, it's 7 to 10 days max, and then we back it off. Now, what about this big dose that I take at night? Why do I take it at night? I read an article long ago that especially melatonin combined with vitamin D3 at night increases the survivability of people with severe cachexia and non-operable tumors and stage 4 cancer. Really powerful. Every case is individual. People should listen to their body and use their own intuition as long as it resonates with them. Troy.
Yeah, mine was melatonin too, but the other gem I took is I forget how much I love learning from you, number one. Yeah, suck up, he said. Number two, I write down a book from all the speakers and everything every time, something I haven't read, and you're the only person I write down 22 books that I haven't read, and that's something I've got on my list. So my gem and my takeaway is how much you read, and how you teach it is a blessing to us all, and I just want to thank you, Bob.
Thank you for that, Troy. I'm a book a week guy, typically. Now, a lot of those are audiobooks, but I guarantee you 70 of my last 100 books came from Brian Johnson, Optimize.me. His summary inspired me enough. So with a 20-minute summary audio of a book, you can get a book a day, and he's got about 540 of them now summarized. So I've probably been through 400 of his. The other didn't really get my attention, but that led me to 70 of the last 100 books that I actually read. Erica.
People who watch the news experience more PTSD than those who...
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful statement. People who watch the news get more PTSD than those that don't, that are actually there in the problem. And there's reasons for that. And by the way, we know that we're wired to be on the lookout for something that's dangerous. So anything dangerous captivates our attention and holds us because we don't want to be harmed. And they know that they flood the airways with that, even though the world is clearly more peaceful, more prosperous than it's ever been. Is it possible to inhibit melatonin? I'd say it's possible. Your opinion on women intermittent fasting during the follicular phase. Some research suggests doing so can produce more leptin, ghrelin, and insulin. I don't have a substantiated scientific opinion on that. So I would go with your own intuition. We certainly know that our primary purpose is to actually pass on our DNA. We also know that healthy animals conceive, sick animals don't. Birth control actually is naturally the result of sickness and insulin resistance. And I believe intermittent fasting makes us healthier and overall is good, but I don't have an educated opinion on that statement. What about mTOR and potential relationship to cancer? There's a lot of drugs that are tying mTOR, mammalian target of rapamycin, and amino acid stimulation promoting growth of cells. And that's what mTOR does. It promotes growth of cells. So does protein. So you got to look and say, why do I want to be here, right? And then you look at what people eat, and you look how it responds to your body, and you look how your ancestors ate, and you look at other biochemical parameters. I'm thinking Greg has maybe 1 or 2 pounds more muscle than the average guy, but he's also in his 60s, and he's a picture of health. So I don't think he gets there by not doing any protein, right? So you can balance it with other lifestyle and nutrition sources, but honor your own tuition, your body, your goals. Will the daily dose of melatonin that is needed to minimize cancer decrease inflammation and increase the immune system? That's been my experience. When we use melatonin to put the brakes on cortisol, we eliminate cortisol resistance. Remember, when there's cortisol resistance, the body makes more cortisol because it's having less effect. The first thing it has less effect on is the inflammatory process. So when we decrease cortisol resistance, we increase cortisol's ability to buffer the inflammatory process. The last thing we lose is immunosuppression. Cortisol always seems to do that. If we decrease the release of cortisol, we enhance immune function. Our screens that we are looking at here qualify as blue light indicators. I don't know that for sure, but I would bet that they are. Most of them need filters. We should unplug regularly. A little blue light, okay. Too much, And how much is too much depends on who you are and your vulnerability. So we need to listen to that. Is melatonin contraindicated in Alzheimer's or dementia patients? Not that I know of. I use it quite frequently. So Dale Bredesen wrote the book, The End of Alzheimer's. He says there's 3 major risk factors of Alzheimer's and 35 different subfactors. And basically it's inflammation, toxicity, and lack of growth factors. So melatonin is going to buffer the inflammatory process. Melatonin is going to make the body more efficient at detoxifying because stress puts the brakes on detox. And melatonin will calm the adrenals, which I believe is the master hormone, which will create the growth factors that are needed. Will calorie restriction fasting reduce function of the thyroid in women? I don't know the answer to that, but as a general rule, use it or lose it. If you're relying less on your metabolism because you're putting less in the system, you probably don't need the same metabolic rate, so it likely would slow what's being used, but that's what's associated with longevity. I wouldn't think it'd be a pathology, but a more relaxed physiology. Exercise and circadian rhythm, anything extra on time of day, personal profile indication, great stuff, movement, melatonin. Kurt, I'm going to say move during the light and sleep during the dark, and don't move too intensely as dark starts to come. Some people do great out of bed exercising. I actually find my best time is midday. My worst time is late. But I know my rhythm because I've tried all of them. 90% of serotonin is made in the gut. Does the conversion to melatonin occur there too? That would be my best guess. Since the gut is since melatonin is on the same pathway, they're also derived from tryptophan, it makes sense that that conversion would occur. Since mitochondrial function is involved in cancer, is there a screening test that you like? Maybe Jeff Katulski will share his data on nagalase or on the AMAS. Jeff, what do you like best as a screening? We don't have a great test. Okay, fair enough. We don't have a great test. I'll agree with that. So here's the deal. We all have cancer. It's all up to us. As David Agus said, cancer is not a noun, it's a verb. You're either cancering or you're not. We now have cutting edge, but it's really not cutting edge since they've been around since the beginning of time, but scientific validation that the healthy habits that have been promoted from this company and this podium for what, 40 years now, Greg? Is the strategy that's going to help us. Mm-hmm. Well, there's people that will debate that. In my mind, it is. There's people that don't like to do it. I haven't seen good science that says that it's contraindicated. I don't have any problem taking a stressed out kid who's overly inflamed, giving him melatonin to calm him down, and it works like a champ. Now, we're not doing it forever. We're going to break the pattern. We're going to clean up the gut. We're going to get on a better diet. All those things count. I think I'm officially out of time, and so I think Greg is coming up with something, but...
You're awfully hard to follow, Bob, so I'm just coming up to just make an announcement or two.
Okay,
so,
cool.
Amazing day. Thank you all for being with us. And thank you, Bob. That was outstanding. You did too.